reminder, we have a little bit of a complicated evening. A special council meeting, and then it will be followed by a study session. So, Lynette, you want to call the roll?
Councilmember Applebaum? Rocket?
Here.
Burton? Here. Jones?
Here.
Morzell? Shoemaker? Weaver? Yates?
Here.
Young? Here. We have a quorum.
Excellent. And I assume the tape knows it's October 24th, 2017. So tonight's special meeting agenda is several matters from our consent agenda from last week that we knew that people wanted to speak to, as well as a matter on sheltering. And so we're going to go ahead and have open comment on those matters. If folks can start with their name and address, and you'll have 2 minutes. And if you'll come up to the lectern over here, we decided we'd keep it more informal since we're really having mostly a study session tonight. So if you can come over there, that would be great. And with that, we'll go ahead and get started with Carl.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and greetings to the City Council this evening. I would note that today is United Nations Day in the world, as well as World Polio Day. That is not why I'm here. My name is Carlton Seaman. My name is misspelled. It's ST instead of TS. I live in North Boulder. I'm retired from the UN. I'm a polio eradicator, but what brings me here tonight is that I am a member of the Board of Directors of the Boulder-Nablus Sister City project. And I am here at the direction of the board to deliver a message to the council. And that message is simple. It's 2 words. It's thank you. And we wanted to say this because some of the council members aren't going to be here a month from now. And so we wanted to say it while it was still the council that approved our application almost a year ago. The council has expressed its confidence in us, and we believe that we have lived up to that confidence this past year, and we will continue to do so. We also want to thank the council for their political courage in approving us, because there was significant and politically powerful opposition to our application, and so it was a courageous decision that you took to approve us as the 8th sister city in Boulder. The final thing I want to say is that we did do a delegation to Nablus earlier this year. We're doing another one next year, approximately October of next year, and all city council members are invited to join us to come to Nablus in October of 2018, and even ex-city council members are invited to join us. And I want to hand around these brochures on the project for you. If I could just ask them to be spread around. And I'm out of time, so thank you.
Thank you, Carl. Next up is Ambrosia. And after Ambrosia, we have Will.
Hello, I am Ambrosia Pardhu Lee. I am a board member of the United Nations Association Boulder County. I am also pursuing my master's in public policy at Denver and involved with the Cities for CDOT here in Colorado. So I am working with the Cities for CDOT to help get Colorado on the map for being a progressive and committed to supporting equality for all. As a woman, I am passionate about closing the gaps that exist on so many levels. As a board member of the UNA, I am passionate about providing human rights for all individuals. And as a professional, I am passionate about creating policies that change the status quo. Currently, women account for half of the population, but hold only 38% of management positions in all fields, and only 0.042% of Fortune 500 companies are headed by women. And as we all know, women are paid less for the same work as men, on average 20% less, for absolutely no reason. The pay gap is even worse for ethnic minorities. Fortunately, here in Colorado, the pay gap's a little bit better. We have about a 14% pay gap between men and women. So becoming a Cities for CDOT is important because it publicly vocalizes that we are all equal, regardless of race, gender, religion, class, and other intersectionalities that make us unique. I urge Boulder to join the list of Colorado cities who have signed resolutions and then to pass legislation to protect the rights of women and girls. Let's make a stand against injustice and provide a role model to the rest of Colorado, the United States, and the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Will, and after Will, if Nathan can be ready.
Thank you. My name is Will Soper. I live in downtown Denver, but attend school here at the University of Colorado in Boulder. As such, I want to talk today about the importance of transportation connections and Boulder's role as a leader in ensuring a truly regional transportation system. As the Front Range grows, so will intercommunity travel and therefore congestion. Projects that leverage efficient use of regional facilities are critically important to accessibility and mobility. The Flatiron Flyer bus route using US 36 HOT managed lanes is an excellent example, one that I see twice a day. As some of you may know, the Denver Regional Council of Governments, or DRCOG, is the federally mandated organization responsible for regional transportation planning in our area. DRCOG also directly allocates about $90 million a year in transportation funds. DRCOG's project selection process is slated for a big change starting in 2020. Instead of a truly regional process that advances collective goals and creates intermunicipal commuting options, DRCOG will be experimenting with a sub-regional process that allocates a pro rata share of the funds to each county. The counties and their municipalities will then devise their own project selection methods. I understand the appeal of local control over project selection, but I harbor deep concerns that local priorities will subvert the types of regional transportation project which makes Boulder accessible for long-distance commuters like myself. As the new process moves forward, I urge the City of Boulder, through its DRCOG representatives, to take a strong leadership position, require regional planning goals to be a component of the sub-regional process, continue to work with communities outside of Boulder County to support a holistic view of transportation needs, and remain an example of how a regional transportation system can benefit local governments. Finally, I ask that the city and its representatives watch this new process critically and carefully and be willing to move away from it if it doesn't work. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. Thanks.
Wow, I'm pretty sure nobody's come and talked to us about DRCOG funding priorities before. So,
Can I just chime in?
Yeah.
Will, thank you for your comments. I'm the DRCOG representative, and we're thinking along similar lines. I appreciate your thoughts. Feel free to email me directly. We can have a conversation.
Nathan.
All right, good evening. As stated, my name is Nathan Hunt. I am the Director of Economic Justice for the Interfaith Alliance of Colorado and one of several co-founders of Colorado Village Collaborative. This year, our organization built the first tiny home community for people experiencing homelessness in the state. It is this work I was asked to come speak to you about. That homelessness is a crisis for Boulder should not need reinforcing. It's a prime topic of your agenda tonight. What I want to emphasize is our capacity to do more of what is needed with the resources we already have. Traditional shelter will not solve the disaster we're facing. You and I both know that. People experiencing homelessness are desperate to be treated with the dignity they deserve as human beings. People without a house need somewhere to store their belongings, somewhere that is safe no matter their race, gender, or sexual orientation, somewhere that can accommodate couples, people with any disability, any work schedule, and people with pets and service animals, somewhere that blends both privacy and a sense of ownership. To eradicate the oppression of homelessness from our communities, we must establish housing as a human right, build communities of care, and return power to the hands of those it's been taken from. Too often we may agree with those precepts in principle, but self-limit our capacity to deliver on them because we're convinced that we do not have the resources. In Denver, we've been told that creating one new unit of affordable housing costs on average $250,000, and that it will take 2 to 3 years to move from conception to habitability. Our homes cost less than $20,000 per unit. We submitted plans in March, began construction in May, and residents moved in exactly 2 months later. We have been embraced by the surrounding neighborhood, have had no complaints or calls to police. None of our 15 residents have dropped out or returned to the streets. 12 of them now have jobs. Tiny home villages are cheap, quick, and environmentally sustainable. They offer the dignity, empowerment, and community people deserve. We've done this. We have the knowledge base and human power to do it again in Boulder. You have the power and resources to open the way. Let's work together to do this right. Thank you.
Thank you, Nathan. Leslie.
Thank you so much. My name is Lustig Lustrum. I'm a Boulder resident, and I want to thank you for this opportunity. I'm here for a number of reasons, but most importantly, I'm here because we have an important decision before us in the community with respect to our energy future, and whether to vote yes on ballot measure 2L or whether to vote no. There is a flyer that has been mailed to many Boulder residences, and it's misleading in two very important ways. I have a full PowerPoint. It'll be sent to City Council. It'll also be available at Empower Our Future. But I want to make sure that the community understands that the flyer they're receiving in their mailbox has these two very misleading assertions in it. The first one is that somehow if we vote no on ballot measure 2L, there will be $300 million that we can spend on solar and other important ways. That is flat wrong. The $300 million is what we might decide to do a few years from now. It would be bonded. It can only be done if we have a source of revenue and if we decide to form a municipal utility. That's the first very important and frankly flat wrong and misleading assertion that's made in that flyer. The second is what we have discussed before, which is the effort to make a big deal out of the blue bars. That's utility occupation tax that would be accommodated in ballot measure 2L. It's a little scary because it says, oh, we're going to raise taxes by $4 million. That comes out to about $2 per household. I went to farmer's market to get some visual aids. That's what we call small potatoes. Thank you. Farmers Market, happiest city in the world. Love the small potatoes. They are amazingly good. The big red bars are the big potatoes. Those are the costs that will go up dramatically if we stay with XL. We're looking at 10 to 14% rate increase, $3 a month increase approved for October 1st. Bonds worth over $600 million that we're already largely responsible for. These are all documented in the PowerPoint that will be available either through the City Council's email or at empowerourfuture.org. Don't think so much about the little potatoes. Pay attention to the big potatoes. Don't be misled. And vote yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. And next up is, we need that chart.
Veronica.
Oh, Veronica's up. Thank you. And Evan and then Steve.
Honorable Mayor Jones and Boulder City Council and staff, I'm Veronica Rocky from Boulder County and Colorado Cities for CEDAW Task Force. CEDAW stands for the Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. The U.S. is the only industrial country yet to ratify this treaty. In partnership with Business Professional Women of Colorado, I am representing United Nations Association of Boulder County. I would like humbly ask those that are here in support of CEDAW to please stand. Thank you. I also have letters of those that were struggling with communicating electronically, and I'll hand those in. Under the Peace Operations Division of the Peacekeeping and Stability Operations Institute, as the U.S. Army Lead for Women's Peace and Security, Cities for CEDAW hits close to home for me. The work I do here and within my own community echoes exponentially in the work I do to enable soldiers, land component forces on the ground in the implementation of applying gender dynamics in military operations in conflict areas, while being an example of seeing the value women bring to the peace table. Of interest, last week, a newly formed U.S. Women's Caucus representing non-government organizations to the United Nations had their first coming out, and they're focusing on CEDAW and the national implementation. Just 2 weeks ago, the President of the United States signed into law the Women's Peace and Security Act, which requires Department of State, USAID, and Department of Defense to take action. Last month, the International Association of Office Human Rights Agencies, led by U.S. and in partnership with Canada, signed a CEDAW resolution urging its members to support municipal, country, and statewide efforts to implement policies that advance gender equality and principles of CEDAW. On top of it all, today is UN Day. It's the 72nd anniversary. Sustainable development. Thank you.
Sorry about that, but thank you. Evan.
Evan Ravitz, downtown Boulder. This is from one of 500 emails I got through the Colorado Open Records Act from City Council candidate Ed Byrne to Councilwoman Jan Burton, March 31. I wouldn't vote for Ed, but good for him. Quote, I had the very unpleasant experience this morning of watching the city inspect a client's fiveplex for occupancy violations. Remember, this inspection was not based on a complaint, no. Now the city comes armed with online advertised floor plans and old building permit submittals looking for any discrepancies and literally counting beds. We were able to get into a couple of the locked rooms because the property manager was able to open the doors with a driver's license. When the inspection was over, I wanted to take a shower. The government has no substantial and compelling reason to do this. If overoccupancy is placing a burden on the neighborhood and a reasonable complaint is lodged, make arrangements for an inspection. Get a warrant if the tenants don't let you in. What if a roused sleeping tenant had a gun? What the F are the city's inspectors now doing in our name? We are feeding Mr. Carr, that's the city attorney, Mr. Carr's pro-enforcement beast. He will not check his own instincts during this initiative, unquote. You, the city council, also fed Mr. Carr's pro-enforcement beast with an extra $300,000 to prosecute and imprison the homeless this summer. That would have helped each homeless person with about $500. Cleaned them up, got them off the streets. None of you objected to this. Anyone who believes a word of the city's propaganda about being kind and welcoming needs to Google DU Law School Homeless Report. Thank you.
Thanks, Evan. Steve and then Kayla.
Steve Pomerance, 335 17th Street. I request that you ask the county clerk to not count the votes on ballot measure 2Q. I checked with them yesterday, and they have a procedure for this. I believe that 2Q was put on the ballot without sufficient consideration of its implications. The ballot title is completely inadequate given 2Q's significance. I cannot tell you how many people have contacted me to let me know that they were totally surprised to hear what's really in it. 2Q is like one of the Republican repeal and replace efforts. It throws out a very clear and workable municipal initiative procedure and replaces it with total uncertainty. The current timeline that's in the charter works pretty well, so why change it? It's way more functional than state law, which could force you into holding a special election for a municipal initiative if the signatures are certified by early June, or allow you no negotiating time if the signatures are certified in early September. So why are you throwing something that works out when you don't have something better to replace it with? By the way, under state law, charter amendments have a different schedule than municipal initiatives, so there's no way to avoid that conflict no matter what you do. Finally, 2Q puts the city manager in an impossible position because of all the discretion that is granted to him or her. No matter how the manager sets the rules, he or she will be under enormous pressure from various groups to either make the rules easier or make them harder. And for each initiative, that pressure may change. So citizens who want to do a municipal initiative will get caught in the whiplash. Again, please ask the county clerk to not count the votes. Leave things as they are until you come up with something significantly better. And next time, include citizens who have been through the process. At least they can tell you if there's water in the pool before you dive off the board.
Thanks, Steve. Kayla, and then Mike Homner.
Hello, my name is Kayla Berry, and I'm a Boulder resident. I'm an intern at the United Nations Association of Boulder County, and specifically do work with Colorado Cities for CEDA. I'm also a junior at CU Boulder studying anthropology, political science, and leadership regarding social and environmental justice. I have grown up with many influential, powerful women in my life who have inspired me to dedicate myself to encouraging all women to find their voices and stand for their rights and their place in this world. Being a female in college and preparing to enter into the professional workforce, it is a key moment for me where I am personally experiencing a lot of the forms of of discrimination that many women feel on a day-to-day basis. Right now, I would like to list for you all of the organizations who are in support of Cities for CEDAW and are ready to come to the table with you and work on addressing the principles of CEDAW. Our supporting organizations are the Business and Professional Women of Colorado, the Women's Collaborative of Colorado, Boulder Valley Women's Health Center, the League of Women Voters, Denver for CEDAW, Colorado Eco Women, He for She Our, the Safe House Progressive Alliance for Nonviolence, Laboratory to Combat Human Trafficking, the Voice of Bold Business Radio, Safe Shelter for St. Vrain Valley, Pride Sanitary Pad, We Can International, Colorado Women's Education Foundation, 1 Billion Acts of Peace, 9 to 5, Santa Foothills Club of Boulder County, Moving to End Sexual Assault, the United Nations Association of the United States of America Boulder County Chapter and Denver Chapter, and Raising of America Boulder County. The legislators who have dedicated support to Colorado Cities for CEDAW are Senator Matt Jones and Representative Joe Zalazar, who actually presented us with a testimony about the great influence his mother has had on his life, which can be found on our website. Thank you.
Thank you, Kayla. Mike?
Mike Homner, North Boulder resident. I want to thank the UN for being here and holding up civil rights of everybody. And I hope you guys think about the homeless when you're thinking about that. Not only women, but homeless women. I want to follow up on Nathan about his talk about tiny homes. We went to Portland and we went to Eugene. We saw all these beautiful solutions. And to date, we have done zero. Absolutely zero. That's sad. On October 8th, we had snow here. We had an emergency opening. In the numbers that were sent out, they said it wasn't full, but I was told differently, not only through anecdotal evidence, but actually somebody came to me and told me that they were turned away at Harshem, Congregation Harshem, for the Path to Home to get in that night when it was snowing. So I want to make sure you guys know this. We're going to have people die because of what we have set up. That's on your hands. I will hold you accountable. It looks like that we have more of a diversion than we have helping people. Do we have those 52 or so vouchers in hand yet? Or we still have 36? I'd like to know that. And I sent you all an email, and not one person responded back to me. You are our servants. We put you there. We would like to get ahead. Let me take that word back, servants. You are our representatives. And I would like to see that you represent everybody in here, not just the UN, not just people that come up here and talk about different subjects, but something that we come and talk to you all the time about. So thank you and have a good night.
Thanks, Mike. We have Robert, and then we have Frank Walter.
Honorable Mayor and members of the City Council, my name is Robert McNown, and I'm the president of the UN Association of Boulder County and a resident of the City of Boulder. I'm here to speak in support of the petition for the adoption of a resolution on CEDAW, as some of my colleagues have already. It's particularly timely that the City Council is considering this petition today, which is United Nations Day. The United Nations has adopted 17 Sustainable Development Goals to be reached by 2030. One of these goals, number 5, is to achieve gender equality and empower women and girls. The vulnerability of women and girls to violence, the prevalence of sexual assault, uneven power relationships in the workplace, demeaning treatment of women, and pay inequities facing female workers are problems that have become particularly prominent recently. These are not specifically women's issues, but problems of society that all of us, men and women alike, must combat. Many look to the City of Boulder as an example in advancing human rights and combating discrimination, and we should join with other cities that are supporting CEDAW through resolutions, pronouncements, and ordinances. On behalf of the Boulder County Chapter of the United Nations Association, I urge you to sign a CEDAW resolution taking an important step towards the elimination of all forms of discrimination against women. Thank you.
Thank you. Frank? And then Peggy Leach.
Hello. Hello, members of City Council. My name is Frank Walter. I'm a proponent of renewable energy and climate solutions. I'm also a taxpayer, resident of Boulder, and a user of open space. I'm here today to ask the City of Boulder to reconsider its aggressive energy and climate goals. I ask not for a reversal, but for a balanced approach to setting benchmarks. For example, the city's goal of 100% clean electricity by 2030 will prove very costly. Why not consider 80 or even 90%? The marginal cost of that last 10 or 20% of the 100% goal will be much more costly than any initial increases in renewable energy production. The benefit of consuming 100% renewable energy rather than 90% may not outweigh the cost to Boulder. Why not wait to pick the highest hanging fruit until it is more economically viable to do so? For example, when battery storage is more cost effective. Some may respond that Aspen did it. Why can't we? Aspen largely achieved its 100% clean energy by purchasing renewable energy credits from distant, faraway generators. That means it largely draws electricity from grids connected to coal-fired power plants and relies on them for its electric service. Citizens of Boulder should not suffer increased costs for a misleading 100% renewable label. That is why I applaud Boulder's goal to municipalize and generate 50% of its electricity. But I also share caution about that. First, the public does not want vast areas of open space plastered with solar panels and wind turbines. In addition, a grid so dependent on local sun and wind will not be reliable without reliance on fossil fuels. To mitigate those harms, if municipalization occurs, the City of Boulder should integrate a limited amount of natural gas, consider buying non-renewable baseload electricity, and strongly incentivize distributed generation through programs such as net metering without a generation cap. In conclusion, please balance the goal of greenhouse gas reductions with affordability, reliability, transparency, and preservation of open space. Thank you.
Thanks, Frank. Peggy, and then Kay Meyer.
Good evening. My name is Peggy Leach, and I'm the president of the League of Women Voters of Boulder County. I urge you to support Resolution 1219 in support of the United Nations Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, called CEDAW. In 1920, women gained the right to vote in the U.S. after decades of struggle. As you can imagine, our organization has a strong record of support for equal rights for women. And on a national level, the League has supported CEDAW over the years. Many women are still subject to pay discrimination, harassment, and domestic violence. About a year ago, our board of directors voted to support the Cities for CEDAW campaign. We are pleased that Louisville and Lafayette have passed resolutions already. We were pleased to work with City Council on the Living Wage Ordinance, which benefited low-wage workers, especially single-parent households, which are disproportionately women. We also appreciate other city ordinances that encourage equity within the community. We feel that City Council can take another positive step by supporting Resolution 1219 tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Peggy. Okay. And then Fred Green.
Honorable Mayor Jones and fellow council members. My name is Kay Meyer. I'm here on behalf of Zonta Foothills and speaking in support of the CEDAW resolution, Cities for CEDAW resolution. Nearly 10 years ago, the Colorado legislature joined about 16 other states and passed House Joint Resolution 08-1009 concerning support for CEDAW, also called the Treaty for the Rights of Women. In this, our state legislature urged the U.S. Senate to ratify this treaty. However, as of now, it has been vetted by various U.S. administrations and awaited Senate passage for over 37 years. So, as with other sensible ideas that have stalled with the U.S. Congress, U.S. cities are taking this up with Cities for CEDAW. The goals are to adopt and implement the CEDAW principles at the grassroots level, with the hope and intent that someday the U.S. Senate will also come around. The city of Boulder needs to be a part of this. Please endorse this resolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Kay. Fred? And then Zuza.
Thank you for taking the time. I'm glad to be here again to share a thought with you about these emergency warming centers and shelters. Whenever I come, I always go back to religious school again. So at the end of Deuteronomy, there's this message, and it says that my father was a fugitive Aramean, and it talks about how these ancient Israelites go into Egypt and are oppressed and beat up, and it's terrible, and somehow, with God's help, is able to be redeemed. And the thing that I want to share with you about that is that part of the reason why the Jewish community in Boulder is so involved in the homelessness issue is because of that memory, a spiritual memory of being fugitives, of being landless, of not having a safe place. And that is something that's still a concern for us. So when you speak about the emergency warming centers, I want to encourage you and advocate, frankly, to go to the higher level for more consistent nights, for the higher temperatures. The faith community isn't fatigued. I think that we are anxious for there to be responses for people who are the most vulnerable that are out there and want them to be treated kindly and with dignity. But this particular version of the emergency warming centers, it can't be the long-term solution either. I know that there's efforts to have this coordinated approach, and I hope that it works. And I think it's important. In fact, it's really significant. And I personally believe it is going down the right path. But the emergency sheltering is also a critical component, and I think more needs to be done. So when I think about my father as a fugitive Aramean, that's in real life too. And I'm taking the fact that there's a part of my ancestry that was homeless, not just talking about Egypt, that seems so foreign to us, but all throughout history, Jews have been wanderers, not by our own choice. And here, I'm here to ask you to think about folks that are the most vulnerable among us. And I appreciate that. Thank you.
Hey, Rabbi, I have a question for you.
Okay.
Well, I'm just curious. One of the trade-offs is to not create a parallel system, to actually make the most of the investment in helping people to get up and out.
Yep.
And so I think that's one of the things we're wrestling with is how do you make sure nobody dies on the street?
Yep.
But don't create a parallel system which kind of just perpetuates.
Agreed. Yeah. I don't want a parallel system. I don't want something else that's not connected to the holistic solution. But we can't, for me, I can't ignore the fact that we have to bring people together to get them to find those solutions and to provide the resources as whether it's elected officials or faith leaders or anybody else to try and figure out how to find that balance. Now, you have the power of the purse. I just get to advocate. So I'm not jealous of where you sit. Nevertheless, I can't believe that it has to be an either or. I just can't. It has to be a both and that's hard for you. Nevertheless, I think that's what needs to take place. I don't want a separate parallel system, and I don't think it has to be inconsistent with a holistic approach to getting people out of a state of homelessness.
Yeah, okay. No, that's helpful. And no matter what, we're doing something. The question is A, B, or C. And so.
Or A, B, and C.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate the question.
Zuza.
Good evening, City Council. My name is Susie Boule. I'm a Boulder resident. I live at 3237 Wright Avenue in Northeast Boulder. Tonight, I would like to encourage you to be local leaders for global goals. which today is very significant on UN Day, the celebration of the human rights adoption by 193 countries in the world. The United States signed as well, and there are many facets to becoming a local leader and embracing sustainable development goals. Without equal rights for women, for example, how can we create sustainability? Today, this evening, I'm also hearing more about our homeless crisis or issue here in town, and that plays into the role as well. And unless we have everybody at the table, it becomes very complicated to create a sustainable system. But basically, my request for you is to adopt a resolution for the cities for CEDAW for Boulder County, and keep in mind that you are elected to be our local leaders for global goals. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Nikhil. And then we have April Simmons.
Hello, I'm Nikhil Mankato. I'm from Boulder, the Deputy Chair of the City of Boulder Human Relations Commission, speaking tonight on my own behalf. I just want to speak in support of Resolution 1219, the Cities for CEDAW project, and I will agree with the sentiments expressed by everyone else who's spoken. And I'll just give a little bit of background. That's something that came to the City Council through the Human Relations Commission. It began, the Cities for CEDAW people came to us all the way back in fall of 2016, and I'm really happy that we have a chance to pass this project tonight, that the council will, because they came to us and they stuck with it. We had a city gender equity pay study going on at the same time that gave an opportunity to come back with the Cities for CEDAW project and see how it matched up with the city. And, you know, sticking with something, when you're an activist and you want the city to do something, it isn't just coming with a good idea. Sometimes, I think initially it was actually rejected by the Human Relations Commission, and they came back, and it's sticking with it and seeing it through to the end and getting to a moment like tonight that I think is special, and I want to commend everyone who was involved in that for sticking with it. Additionally, I just will say, you know, you can speak to a lot of things happening nationally, but also the oppression of women and this kind of pushback against progressive values that I think we all stand for in the city is so strong on a national level now. And if we don't push back and act locally, whether it's changing voting districts, losing the Voting Rights Act and things like that, all of the anti-women sentiment that's happening, I think as a city, we can take a stand and do something locally that will affect things globally. So thank you.
Thank you, Nikhil. April. And then we have Rosanna.
Hello, my name is April Simmons. I grew up in Boulder. I own Grassroots Landscape. My sister, Sharon Simmons, wanted to be here tonight because she's put an amazing amount of heart and soul into this, but she, you know, when it got changed, she's in Egypt. So she told me to take her place, so I better get it right. In 2014, the U.S. Conference of Mayors, representing over 1,400 mayors from across the country, adopted a resolution in support of Cities for CEDAW initiative at its annual meeting. In addition to presidential support for the ratification of CEDAW in the past, as well as support of almost 200 diverse national organizations early on as part of the National CEDAW Task Force, in 2008, during the 66th General Assembly of the State of Colorado, the House Joint Resolution was signed regarding the support of the continuing goals of the United Nations Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, and strongly urged the United States Senate to ratify the convention. They impressed that although women have made major gains in the struggle for equality in social, business, political, legal, educational, and other fields during the past century, there's much yet to be accomplished. This still stands relevant today. I know that, I've had some of my customers, my friends, many people in Boulder have said to me, do you think there's any chance it won't pass? And I have to say, I've lived in Boulder all my life. It's going to pass. That's how I'll end. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, April. Rosanna.
Good evening, City Council. It's a pleasure for me to be here. My name is Rosanna Longo. I live in 4684 Southampton Circle, and I'm here to speak about SIDA. Why this touches my heart? Because I'm an immigrant first. So, personally, I know that for us, immigrants is even double. It's harder in the city of Boulder. I have been serving the Latino community for the last almost 4 years, developing Spanish language broadcasting service where we read Spanish publications. Right now I'm doing master's in Boulder, in the University of Boulder. It's a master's in media and public engagement. And I was lucky that KJNU and the League of Women Voters accepted me to get an internship there. And my obsession, to tell you the truth, is I am obsessed about equality. And I cannot understand why in Boulder we don't have it. And I cannot think about any other magnificent day today to really move this forward. Not only for those that, don't have the same, the same rights, because either they don't have the papers to work or, the language to speak. And I will personally like to request to you that you pass on this ordinance, that you become, besides the the happiest city in the nation, the strongest, the equal city. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosanna. So with that, we're closing open comment. Let me turn to staff. Did you have any comments?
I just wanted to point out that I can't respond to Mr. Pomerance's assertions regarding 2Q because I cannot support a ballot measure. So I'm not going to say anything of that. I will say, however, that it was a product of the Council Charter Committee, which held public meetings. It was first discussed at a May 9th, 2017 study session. It was, the memo describing it was published and made available publicly on our website. It was introduced on consent at first reading on August 1st. There was a public hearing on August 15th. It was passed finally on consent on September 15th, and each one of those times a memo and the ordinance itself was published. So it wasn't something that was done in secret.
So we're about ready to talk about all of these things on consent. Is there anything not on consent that people wanted to respond to? Okay.
Your consent agenda is items A through C.
Okay. Other than to thank everybody for coming. So our consent agenda, we have three items, all of which merit a brief mention. You look like you want to mention one of those, Aaron.
Yeah, well, how could you tell? Well, I just thought I'd start with a motion to approve the consent agenda. Anybody want a second? Thank you. So I'll speak to a couple of these. First of all, thanks to everyone for coming out tonight and supporting the CEDAW resolution. I'm excited that we have this in front of us. I'm appalled that our country hasn't ratified this treaty, but at least we can do our part here on the local level. And just wanted to share a personal thing here. It reminds me of the battle to pass the Equal Rights Amendment back, it's been many years ago now, but this was something my mother was very active in that effort in passing the ERA, and I would go as a kid with her to rallies, and the whole family was very disappointed when that never passed. So anyway, it's great to do our part as a municipality to support moving this forward.
So I will second Aaron's comments, except for going with his mother too.
Never went with my mother.
I never went with your mother.
I think I went with my mom.
But what I wanted to address is Nikhil's comment about how acting locally matters so much, and it does. And I remember the Human Relations Commission spoke about doing a gender equity study, and at the January 2016 retreat, we spoke about it, and indeed the gender equity study was carried out, and found that mostly we're doing pretty well. But there's always things that can be improved, and so the city continues to work on that improvement. But I just wanted to point that out, that acting locally does make a difference, and I thank you all for bringing it forward.
And I'll just echo that. I had the, honor of going down to speak in Denver at their Gender Equity Summit and present the results of our gender equity study. And yeah, the good news is Boulder's doing pretty well. We're one of the best cities in the country. I think we're at 84 cents on the dollar of what women make. But the sad thing is we're not on par. I mean, we're not, men and women still don't get paid equally here. So yes, there's work to be done. And I hope you unleash all your good energy on our Senate. They need to do their jobs. I'll also just mention, though, also on the consent agenda is the regional housing strategy. And a lot of folks, my colleagues in particular, participated in its development. And I think that it's worth noting that it's a big deal that we are moving forward collaboratively with all the communities in our county in setting and taking some concrete steps towards our affordable housing goals together. And I think that that is very notable and will give us good benchmarks from which to measure progress, both as local communities and then as a county. So I think that that's good work. Yeah, so I'll leave it at that.
I can just chime on that too. A number of us were there. There was a lot of really good energy in the room on working on our affordable housing issues, and it's clearly a problem we can't solve by ourselves. So I was really excited to see so many other the local communities being willing to work on it really hard as well. So this new resolution, I think, establishes a 12% goal for the entire county, which is an ambitious one, and I look forward to working with our regional partners on accomplishing that goal.
Anybody else?
So I was there as well, and I think one of there were two things that I remember that were pretty significant that came out of that that summit. One was that we would develop a common language among all of the municipalities within the county, and the other one was that we needed to recognize our strengths and work on our housing goals based on each community's strengths. And finally, none of the goals can happen without actually coming up with a funding stream. And that will be the challenge, to develop that funding stream. And I think we have the beginnings of that here in the city of Boulder, but we can do more.
Okay, we have a motion, a second. Anybody else want to speak? Okay, I think
So
this is roll call. Yeah.
We begin with Mayor Jones.
Yes.
Councilmember Yates?
Yes.
Young?
Yes.
Applebaum? Brockett?
We seem to be yesing tonight, so yes.
Burton?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
All right, thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Your next item is recommendations for severe weather sheltering.
And our Human Services Director, Karen Ron, will be making a presentation.
Good evening, I'm Karen Ron, I'm Human Services Director, and I'm here to present on severe weather sheltering for council consideration. So the agenda we're going to cover tonight is to do a very high-level recap of the homeless strategy recommendations, just for level setting, talk about some past weather-dependent shelter standards, some options for council to consider, and to present a staff recommendation. So the homelessness strategy, the city's homelessness strategy, was approved by council in June of 2017, and it really changed the approach to the adult homeless services system, with the goal of really making the system more effective for clients to enter long-term housing more quickly and to get the more unique and individualized services and programs that they need to be able to exit housing. So the two primary ways that the new system is doing this is through Boulder Shelter for the Homeless, which will be providing our housing-focused shelter once their management plan is through the process, and that has 160 long-term, year-round shelter beds for our higher needs clients. And then the Bridge House Path to Home navigation services would be providing an additional 50 beds, short-term beds, for those clients who have lower needs, and in addition, new navigation services to help people who don't need shelter or only need shelter for a few days to be able to get back on their feet. Severe weather shelter was intended to supplement the sheltering system for those days where there was significant inclement weather for all members of the community who are not engaged in services. Coordinated entry was not a requirement to be able to do walk-up sheltering for severe weather shelter. It was really intended for a safe place for everyone to be able to get out of the weather. So the goals within the new homelessness strategy related to severe weather shelter was to align our emergency response and resources with what our long-term goals were around housing and service solutions. To align the strategy with best practice and to avoid developing a parallel system not aligned with the new system goals, but also to be able to provide additional sheltering and safety for those people who are not part of our system of services. So here's a chart that shows in the past what those severe weather triggers have been in the past. And this is before, of course, the new system of services. So BOHO provided shelter every night, overflow shelter every night, on a walk-up basis between November 15th and March 15th, regardless of the weather conditions. In addition, they had additional weather triggers, which you can see on the right, during other days outside of the November 15th to March 15th time. Hope and Longmont, you can see their weather triggers on the right. Now Longmont is also starting a navigation center, very similar to the city of Boulder's. They will be offering up to 50 additional shelter beds with navigation services. They have not decided at this point whether their community will be offering any additional severe weather sheltering. Then the Severe Weather Shelter Network in the Metro Denver area, they also provide additional severe weather sheltering, and the new Genesis cold weather shelter in Denver. So you can see what these kinds of range of triggers are.
Hey, Karen, can you just clarify again what Longmont's doing? I got a little bit confused there.
So Longmont is also starting a navigation center like Boulder with very similar services and programs.
Like the Bridge House.
Like the Bridge House Path to Home. It's the Bridge House Path to Home Navigation Center, which will be in Longmont, a similar program in Longmont, not provided by Bridge House, however. So it'll be very similar with up to 50 additional short-term shelter beds. They have not decided whether they will be offering any additional severe weather shelter.
Well, then what are those weather conditions on there for?
This is the old weather conditions in Longmont. Yep, this is what their old weather triggers were.
Thank you.
So just as kind of an example here, October 8th and 9th, we did have some winter weather that came in. A Path to Home, which is Bridge House's Navigation Center, 50 spaces. 39 of their spaces were utilized, so they had additional capacity that was unused. Boulder Shelter for the Homeless, 151 of their 160 beds were used. Now, during this time also, Path to Home, we were anticipating a higher level of demand, and Bridge House Path to Home program was prepared for an additional 50 spaces beyond the 50 that they usually have, but they were not used. Now,
Karen, just quick clarification.
Sure.
The Boulder Shelter, those 160 beds, are those still based on the previous emergency shelter?
Yeah, that's total beds.
Okay, they're not program beds yet, correct?
They're not program beds yet.
Okay,
They're
great, thank you.
Total of 160 beds there, yes. So there was unused capacity during this period of time, this October 8th and 9th. I'm not sure, I know Mike had said that there were people who might have been turned away from Path to Home. I'm not sure what that circumstance was, but Bridge House has said they had significant unused capacity. Now, there could be a number of reasons for that. You know, if we're really optimistic, we would say, you know, some initial new service system programs and the way it's operating might be helping with that. But it's probably also likely that in the early season, this winter weather, it was bookended by much warmer weather. So I suspect as we get more deeper into the colder season, this would not be the case. But it was the case with these 2 days.
Karen, I saw those numbers in the memo. I thought they were really interesting, and it was very helpful to put it in perspective. How difficult would it be for your team, obviously in collaboration with Bridge House and the shelter, to periodically publish that not only to council but to the community so we can see these numbers on a regular basis?
Sure. Yeah, we could definitely do that.
Okay. Not to put you to more work,
Yep.
maybe, you know, once a week or twice a month or something like that, just so we can, at a snapshot, see how, you know, our peak usage.
Yep.
Okay.
We can definitely do that. Now, one thing also to note, as this is related to some of the recommendations, October 8th and 9th, I think in general, the lows were in the low 30s with several inches of snow accumulation. But there was also a National Weather Service advisory, which would have triggered opening severe weather shelter under any of the 3 scenarios that are identified. So just to give you that comparison.
But just to clarify, there was no faith-based sheltering that weekend, or those 2 days?
Yes, because Bridge House Path to Home right now, currently temporarily, is providing the Path to Home navigation services at 3 faith-based sites. So until our new site at 30th and Bluff is up and running, that will continue. So faith-based sites, yes, we're engaged in providing the regular Path to Home beds, but also the additional 50 spaces that we thought we might need and didn't. Those were faith-based sites, yes. Is that making sense?
Just saying, Bridge House right now is operating out of
Yes.
faith-based sites. So no matter what, the faith community is a part of this.
So you can see here these three different options. One, which is based just on National Weather Service, the variety of National Weather Service advisories, warnings, and watches. There's about 20 additional shelter days a year. Council, September 19th, when we were in front of council, wanted us to go back and come up with a couple of other options. So there's a couple of other options here. National Weather Service warnings, watches, advisories, that variety, or temperatures at or below 20 degrees. So either one could trigger opening an additional shelter. That would be about 50 to 60 days additional during the sheltering season, which is October to May. Or another option is 1 and 2, but also temperatures at or below 32 with snow predicted. That would be about 60 to 80 days. So what these options show here is that for those very basic days of additional shelter, those 20 in number 1, coordinated entry would not be required at any time. You could just walk up to the shelter each day that there's additional shelter that's needed, and there would be no requirement either that day or the next day to go through coordinated entry. Options 2 and 3 highlights that coordinated entry after the first day would be required, so that after the first day of shelter, people could go to coordinated entry. They could be assessed for what their needs are and their programs they would be referred to, and have a plan developed for them.
Karen, can I ask you a question about that?
Sure.
So, excuse me. So with that coordinated entry required, that would be to get someone in the system.
Yes.
But if, I mean, regardless of the outcome of their assessment, would they still be allowed back in the overnight, the emergency weather-based sheltering?
Yes, but the goal here with these number of days is not to be expanding that parallel system.
Sure.
So we want to make sure that there's plenty of days for basic safety and everybody having that shelter, regardless of whether they want services or not. But if people will be using the system ongoing many days, we'd like to get them into the system of services so that we're not developing that parallel system of having a lot of ongoing shelter without engaging people in help.
Absolutely, which is great. Thank you.
Yeah, but let me
Just to
follow
put
up
it-
on that.
oh, go ahead.
Because you're not being explicit. You're just saying we'd like to. That's
the recommendation.
That's
so.
very different than it will happen. And so, I mean, the question is, people, frankly, typically transients in Boulder who want to do this, and it's fine, they do it for a night, and that's perfectly reasonable. The question is, can they continue doing it throughout the winter and choose not to enter the system we've set up? Because you haven't said they can't, you've just said we'd like them to.
Well,
that's
the recommendation is no.
No what?
No, that they can't continue to get additional sheltering without entering coordinated entry. So the recommendation is coordinated entry required? Yes, for numbers 2 and 3.
So after somebody uses this for 1 time, 2 times, whatever, I don't really care whether it's 1 time or 2 time or even 3 times for that matter, we would say, no, you can't do it anymore unless you enter the coordinated entry system, which has the navigation path and the,
That's right,
and the other
yes.
path and so on. Okay.
Thanks, Matt, for clarifying that. And then just to follow up, to pin it down even further, so we require them to participate with coordinated entry, and then let's say there's a set of recommendations that comes from that, and they say, well, actually, I'm not so interested in Path to Home or a transition bed or whatever. So they go off on their own way. If they come back a week later for emergency sheltering, would they be allowed in?
I don't know. I don't know that we have it that carefully figured out. The overall goal is to get people into the system of services and not have people coming back over and over, even through the severe weather sheltering path. That's not what the goal is. We don't want people doing that. We want them to get them into the system of services, and we want to minimize what the circumstances are that people can do that. There are probably going to be instances of people who are residents of our community who are going to need help, and they may come back a week or 2 weeks later. I'm not sure what the hard and fast rules are going to be around that, but we would like to engage them and get them into services without allowing everyone who's coming into the system through severe weather sheltering to not be engaged in getting into coordinated entry. I'm sure there's going to be some exceptions to that, depending on the individual's need and
those are
what their
great
circumstances are. So to say, no, nobody would be able to come back after a week if they haven't gone into coordinated entry, I think that's probably not the case, but it's not the goal.
Okay, thanks.
I have a question, but have you finished before we, you're still, well, you tell me if I should wait till the end, and that's simply, does the National Weather Service winter watch or warnings, how does that relate to an inch of snow, 2 inches of snow, 3? When do those usually kick in? At what level of precipitation? Let me put it that way. So just trying to figure out how these overlap.
Yeah, so I'm not sure. I'm going to ask Wendy to come up. She's the one who's done some research on what those specifics are.
Okay, and if it's better to wait till the end, that's fine.
You can have an advisory, you can have a warning, you can have a watch. That involves a little bit of snow, a lot of snow, really cold temperatures or higher temperatures.
I'm just trying to figure out, we talked about certainty, and so I'm just trying to figure out what we get. But
yeah, and
you can answer this at the end if you want.
Yeah.
I just wanted to clarify what we're talking about at some point.
Okay. Why don't you clarify that now, Wendy?
Good evening, Wendy Schwartz, Homeless Services Program Manager. So there's not a direct correlation, Suzanne, between inches of precipitation or inches of snow and the winter watches or warnings. Our conversations with the National Weather Service and NOAA, essentially what meteorologists do is look at a combination of factors that roll into severe conditions. And so there could be 3 inches of snow, for instance, at one point, and there's not a severe weather watch or a warning of any kind, and another day with a different set of combination of conditions, there may be. But there's not a direct line you can draw between a certain number of inches of snow and a warning or watch.
All right. Maybe, is there more questions on this?
When do you make the determination? Because, I mean, you can be watching the weather 5-6 days out, and I'm concerned about the faith communities and their ability to plan, their resources. So the question is, are you determining the day of, or 2 days before, or what is the, what's the timeline when you determine that we just hit that bar? And for that, I'm going to ask our Human Services Planner, Lindsay, who did the more detailed research on this.
So I think I can answer that question. So as soon as an advisory is issued, we would be talking with our service providers to stand up additional severe weather sheltering.
But is it by talking to them, that's different than saying go?
No, we would be talking with them about there's a severe weather advisory, warning, watch, and we need to stand up some additional sheltering.
Okay, so the decision point is made.
Is when the weather, yes, is when the weather forecast is indicating we're hitting these triggers.
Right, because we usually see this coming 2 or 3 days in advance.
Well, so just be more specific. But if somebody wanted to know, would they know by 10 o'clock in the morning? Would they know by noon? I mean, there's a protocol here, right?
There's a
what's
protocol,
the protocol?
but
Is it the day before, or?
Well, it depends on when the weather forecast when we're hitting those triggers. So as soon as we're,
Well, I know, but you can look on your phone, and it
Right.
may say it's going to be 20 degrees on Saturday, but at what time do you decide they mean it? I'm just trying to figure out the predictability. That's what you're after is,
right, and
is it, so
yeah.
24, 48 hours out? You
It's
say?
usually about 48 hours out, and sometimes it's a little longer.
From a realistic standpoint, you'd want to make the call, definitely by the night before. Historically, when BOHO operated, they would decide very early in the morning so that they could make the announcement relatively early in the day. But generally, when they were working with faith communities, there was that discussion beforehand, that obviously that this was probably going to happen. This is a good chance that this would happen. But in our communications with BOHO, we usually tried to communicate by late that night before, or
I'd like to make a recommendation that we pick either 24 hours or 48 hours in advance, and we make the call, and we let them know, because otherwise it's not fair to their all the volunteers and people who cook soup and all that stuff. So. I don't know what the right thing is, but we usually, in Colorado, we see these things coming 5-6 days in advance. We're getting a pretty good feeling. So I would say either 24 hours in advance or 48 hours in advance, and let's, make that the protocol.
So, interesting point. We should let you finish.
Yes,
and
thank you.
And we'll get back to recommendations.
Okay. Yeah, and that's definitely something that's could be implemented. So this is just another way of looking at this. This is the estimated percentage of additional total shelter days that would be added to the system based on these three different scenarios. And then on the right, you can see system impacts and provider and client impacts. So the more days that we're adding on an unpredictable basis, then the harder it is for our service providers to staff and identify sites to stand up. So I think to get to your point, Jan, and Suzanne, having a hard and fast cutoff, whether it's 48 hours or 36 hours or whatever that is, would help with that. And so then regardless of the weather conditions, how it pans out, we would be standing up that additional shelter. So this is just showing you, as we add days, the more significant impact there is on the faith-based sites or whatever other sites that would be providing shelter there is to locating staff and having staff and sites all ready to go. Yeah. Sure.
So once you decide that the emergency sheltering is going to happen, what does that set in motion? What does that look like? There's communication that needs to happen, and also I would imagine there's transportation-related efforts, or what does that look like?
So we are in contact with the service provider who's going to be providing it, and then they have to contact their staff and get staff scheduled, get the sites scheduled with the faith-based sites, get the communications out through the networks and communication networks, and get everything together on a very short notice to be able to put things in place. So the service providers who are providing the service and the faith-based sites are the ones who are really coordinating everything and putting it together.
And does that include...
I'm sorry, it looks like my battery is low. So we may...
Is that a commentary on the energy here tonight at the meeting?
Just one more thing. Does that include food preparation as well?
Yes, so that would include the meal at the faith-based site through Community Table if Bridge House is doing this through Navigation Center and expanding those beds for severe weather shelter, or if the shelter is providing severe weather shelter, we don't know who will be providing it, then those meals would be with the service provider, and they would be organizing that, because we don't know yet who will be providing this service. Yeah.
Okay. I think they're looking for a cord, but you better hurry.
Okay, well, we can't.
You have to
You can just click on it.
All right, let's see if we can keep going here. Oh, there we go. So staff recommendation is option 2. That increases the number of days up to 60, or about 60 from the 20 that was the previous recommendation. It provides clear weather conditions and criteria for implementation. It does help restrain the creation of a parallel shelter system and those associated costs. It helps maintain the integrity of our new system of services, and we would also suggest that as the new system of services unfolds this season, that we evaluate those outcomes and what the demand and the need is for severe weather shelter in the future. So we're recommending, staff is recommending option number 2. So depending on what council decides, we would immediately release a scope of services to select a provider to provide the service. We would expedite a contract so that we have this in place for this season. So our council motion is staff requests consideration of this matter and action in the form of the following motion. Motion to approve staff recommendation for severe weather sheltering. So we can take additional questions.
So I have a quick one. You were going to, before, proceed with those next steps, but with a different trigger. So like you say you hope to get it set up. You were already planning on setting this up.
We're going to set up severe weather shelter, but the implementation of
I know.
it,
I'm just saying, it's the trigger
yes.
we're talking about.
That's right.
We're not
No,
launching
that's
anything
right.
that wasn't already going to
That's
be
right.
launched.
That's
So
right.
you said we hope to have it set up, and it's like, well, you're going to have it set up, right? Because you've been planning to do that all along, right?
That's right.
Okay.
Yes, that's correct.
Other questions? Oh, Matt, you're being so subtle with the...
Yeah, so a couple of things. One is the number of people served, and I guess I'm still a little unclear about this. Whatever the outcome of the number of days, is there not some implicit or explicit limit on the number of people who get served in this system?
For severe weather sheltering?
Yeah.
No.
There's no limit.
No.
Okay. Well, then I'll ask, the only other question I have is kind of back to the how serious are we going to be about getting people into the system we hope to get them into, and how will this not be a parallel system if you have unlimited numbers, lots of days, and no absolute requirement that they get into the system if they choose not to? It sure sounds like a parallel system to me.
Well, I think the key would absolutely be the requirement after the first night of sheltering to go through coordinated entry and assessment. And then to have really clear criteria and for how many times you can come back, or if you can come back at all, if you don't participate in coordinated entry.
Well, and plus, before, the shelter was open for 4 months, wasn't it? And
Well, I know what we had before. I'm hoping,
which
I'm hoping
did-
we're changing to a new system.
Well, I meant, but the
That's
fact that
thing.
it's still going to be hard to live outside if we only do these
I
nights.
get that. I'll
Okay.
make a comment at the
Okay.
end. But if you don't want a parallel system, you need something to break the mode of the parallel system. And this doesn't do it unless you have some additional mechanism to make that happen. And I'm still hearing you as saying, yes, we should have it, but it's not clear we will. And we haven't set the parameters yet, and we're still working on it, and who knows how it will turn out. And that's a little disappointing. It doesn't help me kind of make a decision here tonight.
Well, I think not. I mean, we're pretty committed to not developing a parallel sheltering system. So I think your point is that if there isn't a requirement to enter coordinated entry on the second day, the second day or the third day, but pretty close to the first time someone is in shelter, then we are developing a parallel shelter system. That is why on the recommendations that we say coordinated entry would be required for options 2 or 3. But the detail of exactly, what that would look like hasn't been developed yet. We would have to develop it, but that's the goal.
Well, and I'll just put it out there. I think that is laudable, and it makes sense to try not to create a parallel system and really focus efforts on getting people up and out. But we also don't want people to die on the streets. And so we just have to acknowledge that those things are, every now and then they'll be in conflict, and we still don't want people to die on the streets. And so it'll be a little muddy, and that's the way it is, I think, and that's the way it's going to have to be.
So I'll make my quick comment now. I mean, I get that, but it doesn't work. We've proven it doesn't work. That is an unsustainable system. What happens is Boulder attracts enormous numbers of people from the region, from the state, from everywhere. And it doesn't work for Boulder, it doesn't work for any community. It can't work in the long run. It can't even work in the short run. I mean, the reason I voted for the previous go-around is because I thought it was a package, that we go to this other system. It's not perfect. There is no perfect system. But it's pretty good when you add it to our other efforts on affordable housing and stuff like that. This, to me, just undoes what we've done to a very large extent. Even understanding what you said, Suzanne, it still undoes it. And I think we just end up back where we were, having 2 parallel systems, spending more money, accomplishing something with the good system, to be sure, but undoing a lot of it with the parallel system. And I think, in another year or 2, people will realize that didn't work either. And we have to find a way to basically put the message out that we definitely want to deal with people who are homeless, who really are living in our community, absolutely. And I think we do a pretty good job of that. Not perfect, but pretty good. But we can't do that job for everybody in the region and the state and the country who comes here because we provide services that very few other communities provide. And that's my problem. And I think this will be a parallel system. It'll be more days. It'll be, I'm not holding my breath on really forcing people to go through the navigation system, or even what we're going to do with them after they go through the navigation system and they choose to stay here and not be part of the system. So that's my concern. And I would just like to see that happen faster. It's not about money. I'd be more than willing to put more money into the system that works, and certainly into housing, and certainly into transitional housing. It's about making it work, and I think this undermines the effort. So that's my concern.
Other thoughts? Whoever wants to go.
Can I just follow up? Do you have any recommendations, Matt?
You're expecting me to be way too smart. And I'm not. For me, the recommendation is go with the new system, make it work. We're investing a lot of money into it, get people to go through the evaluations, the navigation system, and so on. If you want to have, at least for this year, some limited amount of severe weather sheltering, I think that's not unreasonable. I would limit it to some number of days, and I don't have a super strong preference. But I'd certainly make sure people are required to enter the system after a couple of uses, let's say, and that also we are serious about what we mean by navigation systems. It's a polite word, but if you're not serious about it, you just stay in the same, the same unending mess that you're in, and I don't think you're really helping people in the end.
Okay, so did he answer your question for you? Okay.
So, yeah, I appreciate those thoughts. I mean, I think we do want to be careful that this is a supplement to prevent people from dying on the streets, as Zan says, but not replacing the system that we've carefully set up with checks and balances and with the new homeless strategy. So in terms of a service like this being an attractant, I thought that the comparison with other sheltering facilities in the region was instructive, because I believe the standards in option 3 are very similar to the standards that are used in other shelters in the region, such as the Severe Weather Shelter Network in the Metro Denver and the suburbs, and less permissive than the Hope Center in Longmont. So given that there are other options in the area that are, as open as much or more, I don't see it playing such a big attractant role. So, but I think the imperative here is to not have people dying on the streets when it's preventable. So I do support the option number 3 that the staff put together, because I think it's important to have a precipitation factor to it. Because if it's 23 degrees, but there's 5 inches of snow, but it doesn't quite hit the threshold for a weather service warning, that's a really brutal night. So there's only a few, there's a modest number of additional nights for number 3, but I think it would be worth going down that route. But I wanted to support what Jan said before about strong standards so that we can give the maximum amount of predictability to our faith-based partners. And I'd encourage us to get those written down in something reliable that folks can depend on. So whether that's 24 hours in advance, or I'm not sure exactly what it is, I would let people figure those details out. But that there is some predictability, I think, is important. So and also the entry and the coordinated entry, the ties to coordinated entry, I think are important to get people into the system. So Karen, I really appreciate the points you're making about making sure that this ties into the existing system that we've set up. And what I heard you saying that you're still figuring out how that would interact. And the request that I would make is, if we go down this route, is to, as you work to put that together, maybe we could get an information packet in a few weeks once those details were hammered out, so that we had a sense of where you were going. So those are my thoughts.
Bob?
I'm going to join Aaron in supporting option number 3. Incrementally, it's not a lot more money, and it does provide greater protection. And I agree with Aaron's comparison of option 3 to some of the other services up and down the Front Range. I get your point, Matt, about the parallel system and the risk of that. But the nice thing about this is the safety net outside of the core system, and we can dial this up and dial it down. So this can be an experimental year, and if we find that we're providing too much service or it's unnecessary, we can always ratchet it back. As a matter of fact, quite frankly, staff could ratchet it back during the middle of the winter if they wanted to. We're not making nothing's can be cast in stone here, and so I'd err on the side of providing more services here, seeing what works, and then reconsidering it. Hopefully a little bit before this time next year, but maybe next summer to do a post-op on how the winter of 2017-18 went, and whether we want to continue option 3 or we want to dial it back.
So, go ahead.
So the option number 3, that 60 to 80 days is an estimate. Yeah. So it could very well end up being much, much less. Is that
It could.
correct?
Those estimates are based on a 3-year average.
It is a 3-year running
So on
average, okay.
in any year, depending on the weather, it could be more, it could be less.
So I'm inclined to give ourselves a little more room to operate in. And, I agree with both Bob and Aaron about how we should go forward with this and see how it all works out. I also share Matt's concern about not creating a parallel system, so that we do have to be firm as well on when we have people enter into the navigation services. But I would rather give ourselves a little bit of a safety margin with the number of days, rather than, I suspect that if we chose option number 2 and we were at day 61, we'd be scrambling anyway. So that's kind of how I'm looking at it.
Okay, I'll jump in. I think we're headed the right place. I think going from having 4 months of overflow shelter to weather dependent will be a big step towards not creating a parallel system. I think if you do coordinated entry, I think you're saying by the 2nd or 3rd night, somewhere in there, that also makes sense. I know Matt wants it soon. I think the deal is to be firm but compassionate. That's what we're after, right? So I guess the other thing is I like what we're saying about, think of this as adaptive management, right? We are trying this new program out. We're going to, collect data. We're going to learn from it. We're going to adapt accordingly. It makes sense to me that we have a study session on this in, I don't know, end of January and see how things are going. If there's tweaks that need to be made for the rest of the season. I would also say, I would encourage Longmont to adopt similar measures. I think we should maybe see if that's a conversation that would make sense to have Metro-wide so that everybody's come on the same page, rather than people are running around trying to figure out which city is the best option. They stay in the city where they're at. So I guess that's where I'm at. I know, you should know that I think this council is very supportive of setting up this other system and really investing in and making it work. And yet, we want to make sure nobody dies on the streets. And so I'm with you, and this to me is a decent compromise. So, anything else to add? Okay, did you want to make that motion?
I'll move that we approve option number 3 for the weather-dependent sheltering.
Second.
Okay. Because we made a motion, we need to see if anybody in the public wants to speak to this who hasn't already spoken to us about this topic. Does anybody want to speak that hasn't already spoken? We invite you to come on up there, and then and then you just have to. Wait, why are we doing that? Okay. And then we'll just need you to give her name, your official name, to the list maker.
Will do. Well, thank you for considering this. I wanted to
Introduce yourself.
Oh, sorry, Maria Krantz.
Yeah.
This is my big concern. I did want to say that it won't be as difficult. Food will not, the community table will continue anyway, so it won't be as hard on congregations. I am sure that we can get congregations to just take one day a week, so they know that they will be on call one day a week, and that will make it work. My concern is that in 21 degrees, people will die. So I would love to see that temperature raised. At Boho, we stayed at 32 degrees, and that worked very well. And so that's my only concern. Otherwise, I just want to thank you for considering number 3.
Great, thank you. Yes, and if you can give your name to the clerk, that would be great, just so she has you. Come on up.
I'm a little nervous.
Oh, don't be nervous. We're friendly.
Microphone. My name is Nancy Jordan. I used to live in Boulder. I was at one time homeless in Boulder. I worked for Boho years ago, and I'm not homeless anymore, happy to say. What I want to say is that I'm glad that you all are considering the number 3 option, and that you've considered it all very carefully. I want to express that I'm in favor of, like case management and them, going through resources. It's important to me that, based on what I know of the homeless community, what I've observed over the years and what I know of the people, is that there are a very broad spectrum of needs, and there will probably be a very broad spectrum of goals and limitations and personalities that we'll be dealing with, and not to go easy on people, but to consider the individual they're dealing with when they do that, and to consider, rather than having a cookie cutter, okay, now we want you to do this, now we want you to do that, to consider all the diversity of the people that we're talking about. because there are many, I've seen people be impressively productive and, go sleep on the floor, get up and go to work in the morning, something I don't know if I could pull that off. I mean, that's really hard, for so many reasons. But there are people that are so unaccustomed to sleeping indoors that it's a very hard thing to wrap their mind around, or sleeping inside of a confined area, paying rent and things like that, that the degree of casework would have to be, I think, tailored to each individual person and considered carefully by the people doing it. So I just wanted I want us to be sensitive to that. I think it's really important to consider each individual very carefully and try to help each one according to who they are and where they're at in their life and in their journey. Okay?
Okay.
That's what I wanted to say.
Thank you.
And thank you so much.
You betcha. And if you don't mind giving your name to Lynette, that would be great. Okay, are we good? All right, we're going to close the public comment. We have a motion and a second. Any more discussion? Okay, all those in favor? All those opposed? Okay, great. So I think with that, we're adjourning the special meeting and we're going into a study session. So I'm officially adjourning this special meeting. Yes. And if staff who are doing the study session want to come on up, we'll get started right away.
I need 1 second to pull up the next meeting.
Assuming she knew that, of course, we weren't going to say no, and she factored it in accordingly.
Wait, Suzanne, can you give me just one? Just pull it up again.
Keep getting to see you.
Yeah.
No, everywhere. I know. Yeah. Yeah, I love it.
Hey, if we could get this transition to happen quickly. Yeah, it ain't going to happen quickly.
And then whenever people were saying, just like,
Well, we're 3 days out. I would think, right? Okay. Hey, thanks to everybody who came. If you're going to leave, if you could leave now, that would be awesome. I love how nobody listens to me. I know. Well, okay, we're going to go ahead and start the study session, right? Okay. We have 2 items tonight, and the first one is Chautauqua. Take it away.
Good evening, members of City Council. Good evening, members of City Council. My name is Bill Cowan. I'm the city's principal traffic engineer, and I'm here with Susan Conley, who's the Deputy Director of Community Vitality, and a host of other staff in the audience, as well as our consultant, all of whom have been working for the last 2 years on the development of the Chautauqua Access Management Plan. Now, you may recall when we briefed you on this project in April, we described this as a wicked problem.
That was the first time I heard that.
Yes, it's a good term. A problem which is going to be very difficult to solve, a problem for which many of the solutions are probably going to have negative impacts of their own. This area has a tremendous demand for access. It is not an easy place to access by many modes of transportation, and has very little parking supply, and it also happens to be a landmark. So all of these things contribute to make this a very challenging project. So I am extremely pleased, we are extremely pleased to be here tonight and share with you the results of our pilot program. And we hope that you will be equally pleased. So just a little reminder of how we got here. This 2-year process started back in 2016. Issues surrounding access have existed out there for a very long time, decades. There were concerns from the Colorado Chautauqua Association, which leases the property from us, concerns from neighbors who live to the north about the impacts to them. All of this led to a process that included data collection over the summer of 2016, a very robust public input process, including a community working group that helped advise us on the layout of a pilot program, which we then implemented this past summer, evaluated, and now we're here tonight to discuss those results. The camp has a vision statement. Essentially, it is to manage demand for access, minimize impacts to surrounding neighbors, visitors, cultural resources. Again, this is all of these things make it the wicked problem that it is. Just a reminder of the components. This operated for 13 weekends, June 3rd to August 27th. There was free park-to-park shuttle with free satellite parking. Managed paid parking in the Chautauqua area. That was at a fee of $2.50 per hour, which is about twice what you would pay in the downtown. It included a neighborhood permit parking zone in a neighborhood to the north, as well as permit-only parking in the leasehold area. A robust transportation demand management program that was put together by the Colorado Chautauqua Association and our Go Boulder staff. Subsidized transportation network company rides, which we arranged with Lyft. On-site and on-shuttle ambassador program, which was very popular and very helpful. And a focused marketing and communications plan, which helped get the message out early and assisted the project in being successful. This map shows the layout of the park-to-park shuttle. It's an L-shaped route that ran from the downtown to the Chautauqua area, to the New Vista lot, to CU Regent, and then back again. This ran every 15 minutes from 7 to 7, Saturday and Sunday, and was free.
Bill, can I just ask you a question while you're on that map? The regular route of the hop, which sections of this route are not on the regular hop route?
So I'm going to need to call up staff right off the bat.
So the hop route.
You introduce yourself.
Sure. I'm Natalie Stifler, Transportation Planner with Go Boulder. The hop route doesn't go south of College. Yep.
And then, yeah, thanks very much. Appreciate it.
Don't go too far.
Yeah, all right. You can stay up here if you want.
This graphic shows the different zones that we studied. Again, there were 6 different zones, including a north neighborhood, which we studied to measure where parking might disperse. This shows the original NPP pilot proposal and the area which was not included because residents living on those streets specifically asked not to be included. And then again, a very robust TDM program that one of our Go Boulder staff, Chris Haglin, worked on with the Colorado Chautauqua Association, primarily a carrot-based approach. So the program had several goals. We wanted to reduce automobile and pedestrian conflict. We wanted to reduce automobile mode share, consistent with our transportation master plan goals. And we wanted to reduce parking demand in adjacent neighborhoods. We also had some secondary goals. We wanted to minimize the hop to Chautauqua impacts to the people living near the auditorium. And we wanted to make sure that we did not negatively impact the use of open space. And we had a series of metrics, and we'll go through each of these metrics. But this is all the data that we collected and evaluated through the pilot. So what were the results? So in terms of reducing automobile mode share, we looked at transit shuttle ridership, the TDM program, and the network company subsidy. The park-to-park transit ridership was amazing. An average of almost 900 daily boardings, almost 23,000 riders through the summer. On Saturday, August 8th, there were almost 1,500 people riding the shuttle. That's a third of the people who were trying to get to Chautauqua. This was definitely a crown jewel in the pilot.
Bill, maybe it's in the next slide, my question, so I'll wait.
Okay. This slide shows the boarding breakdown. As you can see, of course, the majority of the boardings and alightings took place at Chautauqua at Baseline and 10th, with the next highest being at New Vista. That points out how important that parking lot is to the program. And then another 14% from downtown and 10% from the CU Regent lot.
Hey, Baseline and 10th, what's there?
That's the Kingsgate? Kingsgate.
So basically,
that's where the shuttle stopped at Chautauqua, at Kingsgate.
oh, okay. I was like,
That's-
where are they parking there? I got you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And then this is what the profile looks like through the day. And blue is the inbound trips, yellow is the outbound trips. As you can see in the morning, of course, everybody's arriving, but by noon, the bus is full, both coming and going. And then, again, typical bell curve. The TDM program, very effective. Again, this was work with the Colorado Chautauqua Association, the Dining Hall, and the Colorado Music Festival. Based on the surveys, a 14% decrease in single occupancy vehicle on those weekends, 10% of the people using the shuttle regularly. These were strong results. The Transportation Network Company, this subsidy was $1.25 per ride in the first half of the pilot. To try and increase use of this effort, we increased the subsidy to $2.50 for the second half. Through the entire summer, we saw 66 total Lyft rides.
Did the increased subsidy, or maybe it's in the next slide?
It's not in the next slide. The increased, the majority of the rides did take place after we increased the subsidy.
Wait, so people would rather ride the bus? Just saying that out loud.
Well, we certainly got a lot of people riding the bus.
Okay.
Pretty social.
So in terms of reducing parking demand on the adjacent neighborhood and leasehold streets, we looked at parking utilization, how the paid parking numbers, and parking enforcement. And again, this is the zones, and the parking utilization was certainly the most time-intensive, data-intensive component of the program. We had 1,262 parking spaces that we were studying multiple days through the summer in each of these zones. And here are the results. On an average of almost 50 fewer cars per hour per day in the area. I mean, that's hundreds of fewer cars that are parking in that Chautauqua area. The majority of that being in the areas where we were hoping that parking would decrease, in the leasehold area and in the NPP zone. People still parked up the green, the Ranger lot, and Baseline, and paid to do so. You will see that there was increased parking in the North neighborhood. And surprisingly, there was sort of a tertiary benefit that people parked less frequently on weekdays, even though the parking restrictions weren't in effect there. That might have been maybe some confusion. They thought it was in effect, but less parking on weekdays as well.
So, Bill, while you're on this slide, sorry to keep interrupting you, but I just had to say how great this data collection is. I mean, these are real numbers, right? I mean, you measured last year and then you measured this year. That's a real quantitative analysis of the effect of the program.
These are real numbers.
Thank you for the good data.
And there's, I mean, and there's little, for many of these numbers, we actually have photos as well. So, I mean, it's hard to dispute.
Yeah, nice.
So you may remember this graphic. This is something we showed you back in April. This is what the streets look like. These red dotted areas are the streets that would meet the NPP criteria. They had over 75% utilization for 4 hours on a particular day. That's really, really parked up. If you look in 2017, that's what it looks like. So we'll do that one more time. This is what it looks like before. And this is what it looks like afterwards. Again, you can see Baseline Road, the Green, the Ranger Lot, McClintock Trailhead. These places are still parked up. The neighborhood roadways, not so much. The big outlier, of course, being 10th Street.
Because they chose to.
Because they chose not to be in the NPP. And you can see that graphic, you can see that point here as well. And what I would ask you to look at here is Grant Place, north of Baseline Road, and the streets that surround it.
Tell us what we're looking at here.
That's the 79%. That's Grant, directly opposite the entrance to Chautauqua. And then the streets that surround it, that red is not good. Red is highly parked up. This is the average peak utilization during the worst time, 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. So that's what it looked like in 2016. This is what it looks like in 2017.
And again, is that 4 hours?
That was over a 5-hour period, 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. That's the average. So I'm going to go back and, again, look at Grant Place and 9th Street, 1 block north, where it says 47% and 41%. You can see that certainly some of the traffic moved up there. And again, if you look over on 10th Street, it was 58%. Now it is 91%. So that street certainly saw a lot of parking utilization.
And is there a magic number? I mean, you've got red. So 75 and above is the problem, and below that, hey, it's not a big deal?
So 75% and above meets the NPP threshold. When a street has 75% parking utilization, it feels pretty full. 60%'s not great, which is why it's light red, and then it's pretty okay after
red,
that.
Just so you know, that
Yeah.
is beige. But.
Yeah.
Can I
Beige,
just-
my apologies.
Pink.
Hey, Bill, can I just ask, I want to make sure that we know what we're looking at here. So what this is saying is, on a weekend in 2017, between 9 and 2, there was 62% utilization at any one point in time, or?
It was the
throughout?
average of that 5-hour time
The
period.
average of the 5-hour.
Yeah. And those 5 hours are pretty consistent. Those are the worst hours of the day.
Thank you.
And then at the bottom, you can see the numbers for the CCA leasehold. Previously, across the entire leasehold, that was a 63% parking utilization. Afterwards, 42% parking utilization. So enforcement was an important component, of course. We averaged almost 50 violations per day, the majority of it being in the 2 neighborhood areas, North NPP and in the leasehold. There were almost 1,300 parking citations issued. 84% of them were for lack of payment, lack of permit. The others would have been for your more typical violations, parking too close to a driveway, not having appropriate license plate, so forth. And less than 20% of them remained unpaid as of October 9th. And that was an important statistic because we were concerned that with so many people coming from out of town, they might just not pay. They might just crinkle it up and throw it away. That was not the case. These numbers are very consistent with parking violation pay rates across the rest of the city.
But Bill, most visitors are from within the county. Did I see that correctly somewhere?
There's a very, I think what our prior data had said was that about a third of the people came from Boulder, another third came from Boulder County Front Range, and then another third came from even more remote than that. So quite a few people coming and maybe thinking they might not have to worry about parking enforcement, but still they paid.
Yay,
So-
good citizens.
Yeah. So in terms of reducing automobile and pedestrian conflict, we looked at crosswalk yielding compliance and speed and volume on baseline. So the crosswalk where the bus stopped at Kingsgate, we saw a 45% increase in the pedestrian crossing volume, and 30% of those pedestrians were the transit users, as you would expect. That's the main reason why there was so much additional crossing there. Compliance at that crosswalk increased from 74% to 95%. 95% compliance is really good. We do not see 95% compliance at a lot of crosswalks in the city of Boulder, so we were very pleased to see that number. The crosswalk up at the main entrance also increased. It was a smaller increase, but it was already up in the 90% category. So at both of these main crosswalks entering the city, we've got over 90% compliance. Traffic volume and speed data here was a little less compelling. Traffic volume stayed in the 9,000 vehicles per day range. Speeds actually look like they are higher in the after condition. That is important to note that after this was completed, after the data collection was completed, and based on an entirely different speed limit evaluation that we had performed, we changed the speed limit on that roadway from 30 to 25. And so these are certainly things that we're going to be monitoring going forward, and especially the speed on that roadway, and trying to make sure that people are not speeding in this area that has such a high pedestrian.
Hey, Bill.
Say the last part again. So as a result of this, you lowered the speed limit?
Not as a result of this, as a part of a separate speed limit evaluation.
But at the end of the summer?
In the entire baseline corridor from city limits east to Broadway, we lowered the speed limit from 30 miles an hour to 25.
Oh, okay. But that wouldn't have affected this data?
And this would not have affected this data. That happened after we collected this data.
So can you explain this daily vehicles? Because I thought we had a major decrease in the number of single occupancy vehicles.
Yeah, so that data certainly does not correlate well with the conclusions that we would draw from all of the rest of that data. And I expect that that is probably because this is a snapshot of data. And the variability in that data is probably within what we would expect to see in terms of a reduction. We will certainly want to collect more data and continue to monitor that going forward. It's also possible that, and this is certainly something that we heard from some people, that number is real, and that what we saw is that, or what people may have been doing is driving up to the Chautauqua site, realizing that they need to pay for parking, and then turning around and driving back and catching the shuttle. And if that were happening, we would expect over time that as the message got out, that would stop. Sooner or later, we expect to see that number go down.
Where is it measured? I mean, is it?
This particular piece of data was measured between 9th and Grant.
Okay, so what we don't know, though, is if people were going up Flagstaff Mountain or whether they were going to Chautauqua, right?
Correct. We just measured it at that one point.
Because I swear there's a ton, as a cyclist, it feels like there's more traffic going up the mountain, which would have nothing to do with Chautauqua, but just more people coming. Anyhow,
yep.
Just curious.
So, of course, we were also interested in trail visitation. It was not our goal to negatively impact trail usage. And there was some concern that by providing a shuttle, we might make it a lot easier, and that there would be a lot more people using the trails. There was concern that by charging for parking, we would chase people away and there would be a lot fewer people using the trails. This is the data that the preliminary data that Open Space and Mountain Parks was able to provide to us from a survey that they did on their trailheads. These are very modest reductions in usage. And it's also important to note that that the main trailhead was actually under construction for a portion of the summer. So we would expect that some portion of that reduction is actually from that rather than from the pilot program. So we look at that and say we don't think we had any significant impact upon trailhead usage.
Okay, you got to stop there. So it says minus 11%.
Yes.
And you said that's modest.
Modest. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And again, in part because the trailhead was under construction.
Okay.
And we feel like that was as much of a factor as anything that the pilot program did. This slide just basically says visitation into the city was the same. This was not an unusual year. People came and visited Boulder just as much in 2017 as they did elsewhere in other years. We definitely heard you when we were discussing the budget for this project to try and be as fiscally prudent as possible. And we were able to keep our expenses down and spend approximately $60,000 less than we had budgeted. We also had $40,000 of additional revenue, more than we had anticipated. So the financial picture for this program was about $100,000 better than we had thought it would be.
Yay.
So we look at all of those factors, especially as they pertain to our goals, and we think that this has been an extremely successful pilot. But there certainly were concerns that were raised. And you've seen some of them in emails that have been provided to you this week. Residents on 9th Street concerned about the transit service and the impacts from that from a noise perspective particularly. There were visitors who had understandable concerns about accessible access and the handicap parking spots couldn't be located near the pay kiosks and how challenging that was. There were concerns from visitors about signage, clarity around license plates. People would park, walk to a kiosk, realize that they needed their license plate and go, oh, and then have to turn around and go back and get their license plate. So we definitely feel like we can improve upon that.
But they were going to go hike 3 miles.
But they're going to go hike 3 miles, yes. I would have done the same thing. So there were definitely issues with visitors downloading the Park Mobile smartphone app. And again, we were very reliant upon that application because we could only put pay kiosks in certain locations. And so having that not perform as well as we hoped was challenging.
So 2 questions on that, Bill. One is, why didn't it perform? Because it works really well downtown. And the second is, do you have a rough estimate of how many people use the kiosk versus Park Mobile? Share.
I don't have the numbers in front of me. It's probably in the memo. Yeah, sorry. And I don't know if anybody else has quick access to the numbers. We're going to get that for you. 64%.
Kiosk. 36% Park Mobile. Do we know why the Park Mobile app people had difficulty with it?
As far as we know, a variety of reasons. Sometimes it was the phone, age of the phone, what was on it, its ability to download apps. For some people, or we also are told as we reached out each week to the provider, a lot of usage in certain physical space at the same time was stressing the system. So we have a number of ways we think it could be improved for next summer, knowing that result.
And just, I guess, to give credit where credit is due, another thing that worked very well was that Susan, after the first week of the program, went to the Landmarks Board and got permission to put a pay kiosk in the Ranger lot. And that helped a lot.
Thank you, Landmarks Board. DRC.
And then, of course, you know, there were concerns from people about having to pay to park. I mean, this project was not without people expressing that concern. Again, you may remember that when we briefed you on this before, I said this could be really contentious and you should go into it with your eyes wide open. We were really surprised at how many people were supportive of this versus how few came out to complain about it. Couldn't have been happier to be wrong.
Bill, could you tell, was it Boulder residents who were concerned, or was it everyone? we heard before that Boulder people say we've paid the tax, so we shouldn't have to pay. Was there any difference there?
Anecdotally, from the ambassadors on site, it sounded like residents expressed more concern. Visitors were just happy to go with the flow.
That would make sense.
So as we completed the pilot and our evaluation, we started to contemplate what preliminary recommendations we might want to make going forward. And of course, we relied heavily on the data collection and analysis. We also had a community questionnaire, which the results are in your packet. But again, a major finding of that questionnaire was just how much support there was for the pilot program this summer. We did stakeholder debriefs with Chautauqua and with the neighborhood to the north and got very positive feedback from them. There were people who had opted into a public email group and were receiving notifications, and we got a lot of feedback from them. And then, of course, we did a charrette with the Colorado Chautauqua Association because as we sit here tonight, we wanted to be absolutely on the same page with them. And we developed our recommendations in concert, and we believe we are. And then, of course, we took advantage of the fantastic What's Up Boulder open house that occurred recently and had a booth there and got feedback there as well. Which brings us to our preliminary recommendations. We are thinking that it would be advantageous to expand the program dates somewhat to include the 2 holiday weekends on either side. That's a pretty modest increase, from 26 days to 33 days. And of course, one of the things we're going to need to work out is, so when do we have access to these parking lots? And which weekends will we have access to these parking lots? And do we want to run a program that maybe only has access to CU Regent lot for a couple of weekends and then has access to New Vista for the rest of it? I mean, these are all details that we're going to need to work out, but at this point, that's our preliminary recommendation. Changing the transit hours from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. This is in part a response to concerns about noise. Starting later hopefully allows a little bit less noise impact in that earlier morning time. Another consideration there is that we are confident that we can incorporate into the contract for service going forward a cleaner, less noisy bus service. And we hope that that will also help mitigate some of the concerns that are being raised there. From a TNC standpoint,
I'm sorry, Bill, can you drill into that? What might that look like, the cleaner, less noisy? Calling Natalie.
So VIA recently, if VIA were to be awarded the contract, they recently received 3 clean diesel vehicles, and they've retired the 3 2004 vehicles that were used quite a bit on this route, and they were the oldest buses in their fleet. And so if they were to be the operator, we think that would alleviate a lot of the noise concerns. The clean diesel buses are much quieter and obviously emit less than the current fleet had over the summer. So I think if VIA were to operate it, we would be able to guarantee that, and they would make a good effort to put those newer vehicles on the route because we have the flexibility to do that in the summers with the lower peak vehicle requirements for the hop during the summers. And then we also would, in the contract for the RFP, prioritize any vendor that would propose on the service that would be prioritizing cleaner vehicles and less noisy vehicles.
Great, thanks very much. And are we going to get any electric hop buses anytime soon? What's our time?
Yeah, so we have secured funding for 2 electric buses, but the way that just the procurement works, we will be able to place the order at the beginning of next year, and then we actually won't receive them to put into operation for a minimum of 18 months.
Oh, wow. Okay, thanks.
So, a question about routing. You know, when you put up the slide up there, the amount of use from downtown and 9th and College was a lot lower than from New Vista. So I'm wondering if you've considered looking at the hop route and perhaps adjusting it a little bit. I don't know what you could do, but to consider the fact that there's a lot less traffic from downtown coming up, or a lot fewer users from downtown coming up to Chautauqua, and how that might affect your decisions in the future.
Yeah, so I think, we saw about 15% of ridership from downtown, and that definitely is significantly less than what we saw from New Vista and the satellite lots. I think part of a reason for that was because we heavily marketed New Vista and CU. That was really where our effort was. And I think had we done a better job of really kind of selling that connection to downtown and the free parking available downtown, and just having more marketing around to visit downtown, I think we would have seen more ridership, and so that was something that we were hoping that we could do this coming summer. And I think, you know, we're considering how we could modify the route to continue to serve downtown and get to Chautauqua and get to our satellite lots. And it just isn't, it's not possible to serve downtown and not use 9th Street is the thing, because unless there's a turnaround at Chautauqua, we don't have any other option. We need turnarounds at the ends of both, you know, at both ends of the route. And if Chautauqua is an end of the route, we don't have a turnaround there. So that's kind of what we're struggling with, I think.
So kind of a follow-up here on the numbers. So the 15% of the total boardings were downtown, but that includes people going back, right?
That's correct.
So if you're thinking about what percentage of the total origination trips were downtown, it'd be closer to 30%, if I understand them correctly.
That's correct.
Almost a third of the people going to Chautauqua were boarding downtown.
Yeah, in terms of inbound and then corresponding outbound, that would be basically a third coming from the downtown, 2/3 coming from either Regent or New Vista.
Yeah, so definitely less, but still substantial.
Right. Yeah. We would not want to lose a third of our ridership.
And you're sure all those people have gone on downtown and went all the way up the hill to Chautauqua?
We're certainly not sure that all of them did, but we're fairly confident that most of them did.
Okay, because I've heard that a lot of people kind of used it as downtown, you know, hopping from one place to another. And, you know, that the noise of the diesels is a big concern. And I've always wondered when I see them empty, if you couldn't try to figure something out like a big van on the 9th Street route that could go more often, and if that wouldn't provide you with enough ridership, and that would certainly take a lot of cost out. Is that something that you considered at all?
Yeah, I think we're looking at all of our options. If we can, in a cost-effective way, have a mix of fleet, then we'll look at that. But it just gets complicated and may not be that cost-effective when it comes to scheduling drivers and meeting all of the requirements.
I mean, another consideration is that, I mean, there were times of the day, especially coming up from New Vista, that bus was full. So, and you got to use the same vehicle, or you get into the turnaround issues that Natalie was mentioning. So if we were to transition to smaller vehicles, we'd have to run it more frequently. And if you were to run it more frequently, then, well, there would be issues with not having the larger bus available at the times when you had the highest ridership.
Kind of related question. I know you said the average ridership was 882 per day. Did you segment those by hour, 7 to 8, 8 to 9, so on and so forth? Because I know that one of the complaints of some of the neighbors was a lot of the 7 o'clock buses were pretty empty. Yeah. And I see you're giving up the 7 o'clock hour, which probably makes sense, but do you have the stats on that?
Yeah, it's, I'm just going to go back real quick to this graphic right here.
Okay, there. Okay.
And that would show you basically the...
and remind me again, what time does the paid parking start?
It is
At 9 a.m.?
8 to 5.
It was
8 to 5.
5. So those 26 people who were riding in the morning in the 7 o'clock hour, we're basically telling them drive and then start paying for parking at 8, or?
Yeah. Well, let me just go back to this graphic here, because I was almost about to get to the answer to your question. The transportation network companies, the Lyft subsidy, we're thinking that this can be a bridge for the shuttle service. And so what we're thinking we're going to propose is that there would be free rides in the hours before and in the hours after the shuttle service, specifically from the Regent parking lot, which is the least used parking lot, up to the site. So if, for instance, you're a Colorado Dining Hall employee and you'd love to use the shuttle so that you could take advantage of the TDM benefits, but you have to your shift starts before the shuttle's going to start, this would be an option for you to lift up, work your shift, and then take the shuttle back. And we think...
Cool.
I saw that starts at 6 a.m., is that right? Was that the memo?
Is that in the memo?
I think that 6 a.m. And then at nighttime it runs to what? 11, thanks.
Likewise, it would be an opportunity for climbers in the evening who maybe or late hikers who are going to come back after the shuttle service has stopped.
This is just a detail, but how, sometimes there's concerts, obviously, on weekend nights. How are you going to avoid people using the shuttle at 10:30, 11 o'clock at night to come home from concerts? Because I would. The lift, yeah.
Chris Hagelin, Senior Transportation Planner. So there are a variety of ways in which we can prevent that through the use of codes. So employees could have specific codes. So, but we definitely want to offer the TNC rides as kind of that guaranteed ride home before and after the shuttle operations. But then during the shuttle operations, there's still, we would subsidize TNC rides for those that want that door-to-door service. We know that some people go to the dining hall and they don't have the physical ability to walk distances, so we can provide that door-to-door service with the TNCs. But at Chautauqua at night, concerts, it may be difficult to police the use of the lift.
Just a couple of other preliminary recommendations. The neighborhood permit parking, that was free during the pilot. We would expect that moving forward as we transitioned into a program that would be a paid permit along the lines of whatever permits are ultimately going to be determined the right rate to charge. The payment system, previously 5 kiosks, we're thinking that we would add 2 and that we would pursue one of them being closer to the dining hall. Also that we would install cradle points, which are a technology, a device, which greatly expands the capability of making that connection for the Park mobile app.
So are you talking wireless boosters? Yes. So phone, okay. Is that on the cell network or would that be a wireless Wi-Fi?
I think it's Wi-Fi. Melissa? It's a cell network price.
Okay, for a variety of carriers, yeah. Great.
And then, of course, we want to make sure we're adequately serving accessible spaces, and so installing accessible smart meters near the disabled parking to ensure that they have easy access to a payment option. In terms of next steps, after we depart here with your feedback, we'll finalize our recommendations, and then we will start our tour of the boards. We'll start with Open Space Board of Trustees on November 8th, and we anticipate being back before you in the first quarter of 2018 with our final recommendations. And we will, of course, need to, there are a number of ordinances that will have to be either permanently modified or modified with some sort of sunset at that time. They'll need to come before both TAB, Open Space Board of Trustees, and yourselves. And then I think a key part of our recommendation, again, at this point, is that we would like to transition from a pilot program to a program. And we think that we could implement a set of recommendations and just let that program run for a series of years. We're recommending 5 at the moment. That would allow the city to complete its neighborhood permit parking evaluation, which in turn could influence the development of the final plan. It would also allow the Open Space Board of Trustees, or the Open Space and Mountain Parks Department, to complete their master plan and then subsequently complete their site-specific plan for the Chautauqua area. We think that both of those projects could influence the final Chautauqua Access Management Plan. And so we would propose that we do this for the next, say, 5 years until those projects are complete, and then revisit the development of the final plan at that time.
So you're expecting the open space plan to take 5 years?
Well, no.
Okay, good. That's the right answer.
But we think that the development of their master plan, and then subsequently after that, the development of their site-specific Chautauqua plan should span about that time.
So can you contrast that?
And it might be 4 years, but
Right.
we don't.
Well, so contrast that recommendation with doing this pilot for another year.
Well, one of the primary considerations with doing a pilot is what you study. I mean, we've spent over $200,000 studying this to date. We feel like we're at a point where we could stop doing that, and we could operate the pilot, report some fairly basic metrics back to you on an annual basis, perhaps through an IP or a similar notification process. That would be the primary difference between continuing to pilot and having it just be a program.
So that's very important. The question of what metrics you would continue to track,
yeah,
I think is pretty relevant, because, well, and I'm sorry, were you done?
Yes.
Okay. Well, okay, so one of the reasons why this is very impressive is you guys really studied it and tracked and provided good data. I understand counting every car that's parked in this neighborhood over, we don't have to, I could totally see scaling back on the level of data or the intensity of data gathered, but you're going to want to track some metrics. So
Yep.
Speak to that, which even if we said, hey, consider it a pilot for another year, but these are the important metrics to keep tracking. I'm just curious.
Yep. So the most time-intensive, financially intensive component is evaluating parking utilization. And there isn't really an elegant way to step back from that. I mean, the value in collecting that data is that you get enough for it to be relevant. And we actually scaled back in the amount of data that we collected in 2017 compared to the amount we collected in 2016. I don't think we would choose to recommend scaling back any further than that. And that was a lot of money to do that. All credit to our excellent consulting firm, Fox Tuttle Hernandez, for helping us with that project. But we did pay them a lot of money to do that.
So I guess in the positive, the things that you would easily be able to continue to track and report on would be, you just went through like 12.
Yeah, so we certainly would plan to track, we would do traffic counts and speed data collection. We would count ridership on the shuttles. Let me just go back to the, I guess I'd have to go pretty far back. The paid parking, transactions of paid parking, and then of course the response from the public, right? Continuing to interact with our stakeholders in the area and continuing to get feedback from them on whether that is still working to their satisfaction.
So is there a way to scale back on the amount of money being paid to study this and still call it a pilot? I mean, to me, the thing about putting something in place for 5 years is you're kind of saying, this will probably be permanent, versus saying, hey, this is a really good first year. Let's keep going with it, but let's not spend as much money tracking every dang car that gets parked. So I'm just contrasting those two approaches, and maybe I'm looking at it the wrong way.
No, I mean, I think you could do that. I mean, we really feel like we think we're ready to transition from pilot to program. But I think the key consideration here would be just how much staff time and how much city dollars wind up getting allocated to the evaluation and piloting of this, because it's been pretty intensive so far, and we'd like it to be we think we're ready to be a lot less than that.
Okay, yeah.
Can I just follow on that? Just 'cause I'm on the same path as her. So you're saying that if we continue as a pilot, it's going to cost a lot more than if we actually put it into a program?
Well, the reason you would call it a pilot is that you are continuing to study in a pretty robust fashion. So,
so by definition, that's what you mean a pilot.
That's what I mean when I'm saying that, yeah.
And there's no hybrid where we say study less and call it a pilot.
Well, and so,
again,
there certainly is. There certainly is, yeah.
Okay, because to me, I would, well, anyhow, I'm monopolizing. But anyhow, just trying to figure out how, I'm not sure, I mean, we're setting a precedent here with regard to open space that I don't know that we're ready to set, but it's been successful here, and it feels like we want to continue, but I'm fine with us not counting to the degree we've been counting. So I don't know, that's where my head's at the moment. We have two people that want to ask questions on this. Me? Yeah. Okay. Who else?
So
you next. Jan.
we have a policy in the city that any new program requires new revenue. So I'm wondering what you're thinking in terms of that new revenue to cover the new program that we're proposing taking on for at least 5 years.
There is, of course, the parking revenue, the paid parking transactions. Depending on the rate, the per hour rate, you can increase or decrease the revenue to the point where it could possibly cover shuttle service and the related needs of the program.
We also have a great financial partner in Visitors Bureau.
Yeah,
Marion
Boulder
Mahoney.
Convention and Visitors Bureau contributed financially and staffed on shuttle ambassadors and at the Ranger Cottage and at the New Vista, or excuse me, the Regent parking lot throughout the program, the pilot.
And is planning to do so again next summer.
Okay. So for any gap, there would have to be some sort of revenue to make up that gap, short of raising the parking fees to twice as much or whatever.
Yes.
I have another question about the neighborhood parking program update. And Susan and I had a brief conversation regarding a new policy perhaps to be added that adds trailheads as one of the criteria for putting in new neighborhood parking permit programs. Is that part of what still needs to be studied, or do we know enough about that to be able to add that to the parking program policy?
Oh, yeah, that still needs to be studied.
Okay, so my other question has to do with, I spoke with, I forgot his name, he's in transportation staff, but he had mentioned to me that there was a, New Vista couldn't provide the asphalt parking, and that there was going to need to be some grassy area that was applied to the parking area, and that was then, I don't know if that was what ended up happening or not, but if it did happen, there was a reseeding, as in RECEEDING, for the grassy area that they were going to require, and I was just curious to know if that had been necessary or not.
So I think our pilot program showed how important it is to have access to the Navista parking lot for at least a portion of the summer. We have requested from the school district to have access to their parking lot, and we have heard back from them that they are willing to allow us to lease that parking lot for next summer. They're understandably not committing to multiple years. They only lease a year at a time. So our access to that would obviously be a year-to-year consideration. And I think at some point we would want to consider, is there a way to secure more permanent access at that point if we think this is going to be a long-term program, perhaps some cooperative agreement with the school district and or CU to have some parking at that location. But we have, at least for this coming summer, access to their parking lot. We would not have to build a separate temporary parking lot and then reseat it. Last summer, when it looked like we were not going to have access to it, that was an alternative that we were considering. That would have been a very expensive alternative, and we're very glad that we did not have to do that.
Yeah, that's good to hear, because it was going to be really expensive.
Yes.
And then, finally, I just wanted to make a comment about one of the things that hasn't really been talked about here, which is how unbelievably pleasant it was to be in the leasehold area. It was so much quieter and just generally just a really wonderful place to be in. So I think that was a very well-kept secret or result of this whole process. So thank you for that.
We're just questions now? Well, let's just, real quick, and then we can get on to comments.
I was going to give comments. I don't have questions.
Okay, does anybody have any more questions? Are we good? Okay, and then we'll go to comments. Okay, go ahead.
It's a real question, which is, do you have any idea, I mean, it relates to a comment I'll make, but this is a real question. Do you have any idea of the people who use the bus and the people who paid for parking? These are really kind of two different questions. How many of them are residents of the city versus how many of them were not? I mean, you'd have to literally ask people, so I'm just curious if we did any of that just to get a sense of the answer.
We have a couple of answers. I mean, again, anecdotally, from ambassadors on the buses, they thought 50 to 60% of the riders were visitors. I don't know if you've...
So we, from the questionnaire in the memo, we just asked people who, if they parked or if they rode, basically, and then we also asked them where they currently reside. And so of the people who responded to whether they parked or rode the shuttle, it's pretty split, 50-50. And then when we asked them where they currently reside, about half of the respondents reside in Boulder, a little over than half. And then the other half was kind of split pretty evenly between Boulder County and the wider Denver metro area. So if that helps at all.
Okay, Jan and then Aaron with the comments.
I wandered around the neighborhood to see how they felt about it. And I got the entire range, really. I would say most were very supportive, saying it worked very, very well, and saying they were fine with things. Some people said they were fine with things beforehand. One guy said, well, I'm going to come back to that. One person mentioned enforcement could be better, although I saw you did a lot of enforcement. And one person mentioned trash. I don't know if you guys had a lot of trash cans or if that's considered a security risk. So I think the neighborhood, by and large, was happy with it. My feedback was you guys did a great job. Well, I'm going to say one thing here, which I'm going to double click on, and that is that diesel. That's a nightmare. You know, that diesel bus going up 9th Street, it's just loud and it's noisy, and, I'm not going to get off that one. So I really think we need to push hard on non-diesel. I still think cute trolley, something like that would be good, but I think the painting of the hop is good. But really, the noise level of that diesel is a major concern, I think, for everyone, and the pollution. To say nothing about the pollution. My feedback is you guys really pulled it together because I think it was a little rushed at the last minute. I think you did a great job. And hats off to CVB for having their people there. That was fantastic. One idea I had was, we have B-cycles all around the place. I wonder if they do e-bikes and if you could put e-cycles down there and let people ride up. Because it's impossible on a regular bike, but it might be possible on an electric bike, and that might be, just one way to take some pressure off of the shuttle system. And then one guy said, I asked him how he liked it. He said, well, if you paid for the shuttle with the parking, that's a good thing, which made me start thinking kind of along the path that Mary and Suzanne were on about the budget. So I think it looked like you were you covered about a third of the expenses. With revenue. So if we're going to do this for 5 more years, I'd really like to see you ratchet that down or ratchet it up with every year. So that ought to be a metric that you're on. Obviously, you had to spend a lot of money with the metrics and the tracking and the marketing to educate people and all that stuff. But that stuff ought to go down over time, right? So if you bring us a 5-year plan, there ought to be a plan that says by year 5 you're getting closer to break even. That's what I'd like you to focus on as one of the items that you would take to the boards and have that discussion. And then again with the, something with the diesel buses, and I always think as I see the hop riding around kind of empty a lot of the time, why we don't look at smaller footprints that can go more often. So I would just encourage you to open your mind to creative thinking around that one. But great, super job. I think a very, very successful pilot. Clearly you met so many metrics that were so great, and I think it really made a difference to all of the communities. So thank you very much to the whole team for that.
Yeah, I'll just echo those sentiments. It was a great success. I'm just really impressed. Thanks to everyone for your hard work and your creativity. And also for the flexibility in the development of the program, because we went through a couple iterations last year, and I feel like it kind of got better at every iteration, and clearly it went really well. I mean, and the data that you tracked really gives us the ability to see exactly what happened on the ground. So it's not just the emails that we get, but we really know what was going on. So I'm very supportive of the continuation of the project. Whether we maybe pay a little more attention to it for another year and call it a pilot, fine, but I'm also supportive of saying this is the right direction. Let's plan on doing this for several years. I mean, I can't, given how well it's gone, it'd be hard to see doing another year where we tracked a little more and then stopping, right? It seems like it's been very successful. So in terms of the complaints, the highlight that we have gotten is the noise complaint, and so whatever we can do on that front, we should work hard on. I know buses are expensive, but the noise of the hop, it's not just about this program, it's also about the hop noise downtown in general. I mean, I'll be walking along talking to somebody downtown on a weekday, and then suddenly a hop goes by and you have to pause for a few seconds. So that, we have a lot of demands for our funds, so it's not like
Soon it will be an electric autonomous vehicle.
All right, just in a day and a half, right? That's coming around the corner. So anyway, we have a lot of demands for our funds, but we would get a double benefit if we were able to improve that fleet. So that would be great. So anyway, but thanks so much.
Bob and then Matt.
2 things. First, I want to admit that I was wrong because I was extremely skeptical about this pilot when you brought it to us at the beginning of the summer, and it obviously
me too.
exceeded our wildest expectations. So thanks for being persistent and just a great success. I do want to echo, well, Susan Conley and I have a long history with Chautauqua CCA, and Susan knows that for many, many years I've been advocating for a cute little trolley, as Jan said. And so I want to put another plug for a cute little trolley, but this time a cute little electric trolley. I looked online. There's tons of electric trolleys for sale. They're used. They're not that expensive. It would solve the noise problem. Plus, I think it would give you like a branding opportunity because you can paint it pretty colors. You can open up the windows during the summertime because this is a summer thing. So I just say, you know, if it doesn't cost a lot of incremental money, I would really encourage you to create a trolley. We're going to go back to the future right here, because there used to be a cute little trolley that went up and down the hill back about 100 years ago, and mimic that, but make it electric so we can address the noise problem as well. If it's hugely expensive, don't do it, but I just like to explore it.
Bob just wants to actually drive the trolley, but here's the good news: you can save money. He'll do it for council rates, which is about $3 an hour. So you could save a lot of money doing this. I think it's a terrific idea.
I would tell jokes too.
Yeah, well, no, that'll discourage people from using it.
Right?
That's a problem. All right, I do have a couple of concerns. It shouldn't be a surprise. I mean, I don't want to rain on anybody's parade here. There were certainly some successes, but looking ahead, I definitely have some concerns, which I just get out here because this is my last shot at it. One, and it's the reason I asked about Boulder residents. When we talked about this before the summer, and I suspect this is no longer the case because you wouldn't be able to afford it, we did talk about not charging Boulder residents, and to me that's still a huge equity issue, or inequity issue as the case may be, and it will get even worse if you up parking meter rates, which are already the highest in Boulder. It's higher than downtown, which is rather remarkable if you think about our real traffic problems in Boulder, which are not weekends at Chautauqua. They're every weekday in the city of Boulder. So it's pretty remarkable already. If you really took that, what I think is equitable step, it would have a big impact on revenues and usage of the bus. I mean, people would still take the bus, certainly, because it's still hard to park up there, but you'd lose a lot of parking revenues. So that's one concern. I would still wish we did it because of the equity issue. I suspect we never will because we can't afford to do it, but does it make it fair or right? The second thing is, as successful as it was, I kind of go back to, is the money really being used effectively relative to other mobility issues we have? And my calculations, which could be wrong, you look at the number of boardings, you divide by 2 because everybody goes and comes, at least anecdotally, because I bike by there lots of weekends in the summer. Usually the people who drive up there, it's multiple people to a car because it's families and stuff. So you do another division, and you basically get that over the summer, the bus probably took the place of 5,000 cars at $200,000 to $250,000 cost. So that's $40 to $50 per car, right? That's the math. Then it doesn't sound so terrific. It sounds kind of expensive, in fact. And particularly when you think about what $200,000 to $250,000 would buy, again, on weekdays, which are really our problems in the city in terms of mobility and in terms of congestion. Yeah, Chautauqua's not great. I'm not arguing it is. There are impacts. Those impacts are just not at the same level to me as what goes on every day in town. And $250,000 would buy a lot of bus service, or eco passes or whatever would really be an effective thing to spend it on. So those are two of my concerns. And the third concern, which is a little bit of a mixed thing, it is certainly true that the leasehold area, as we call it, is a lot calmer. and that's a good thing. But it's also a public space, and I was actually surprised, maybe I should know this before, one of the arguments for not allowing parking up there essentially on the weekend is, well, you need to allow the people who live there and use it to park, and it's unfair if it's all parked up. Except our statistics were, even before we started this program, in the worst period, it was only on average 62% full. And now it's 42% full. And I think that's true because I biked up through there a couple of times late morning during the summer. And what I saw anecdotally was a third to a half of the spots in use. So obviously it isn't a problem of being parked up. That's just simply not true. It is calmer, but the question is, could you make it calmer, but also use that really valuable resource, which remember is owned by the city of Boulder, and could provide a lot of parking to a lot of people who are accessing that or going to the dining hall for a meal too. It's not just people who are hiking, it's people who are doing things. And so I think that is an opportunity that should be looked at as well. And I can imagine ways you could accomplish both of those goals simultaneously, actually, because I've thought about this a bunch. Anyway, those are my concerns. It's not going to stop anybody from continuing this, but I do hope you kind of work on some of those. It's a start. It could be improved. I really am concerned, though, about the effective cost for the benefit when you look at the way I look at it, which maybe isn't the right way to look at it, but boy, that's what the numbers tell you. That is really expensive per car relative to our other transportation needs in Boulder, which I've worried about for a long, long time. And there is just so much money out there, you know? So anyway, I mean, it was a good job. You did a great job on data collection, incredibly helpful. But some more thought on this would, I think, be appropriate.
So I guess the only thing I would add is, well, I'll say it again, yeah, I'm impressed by this. And I don't know if I was as skeptical as Bob, but I'm still it has exceeded my expectations by far. And the ridership on the transits, who would have thought people would ride a bus to go hiking? So I'm pretty fine with where the recommendations are heading. I guess the one thing I would want to see, but presumably the boards will ask and you will provide, is the budget. Like, what would it look like going forward? And it gets at some of the issues Matt raised of, what does it cost over time? Does it ramp down? Is it worth it given other trade-offs? So to me, that's a relevant question because there is a lot of other cool, groovy things we could do. This is one of them, clearly. So I guess to me, that's a live question. And then I am sort of interested in saying, I think we should continue doing this. I don't know if I'm ready to commit to 5 years, but only because I think we need to look at the sustainability of this, given budgets and all this. So I'm happy if all the boards think about that question. And I think we could have a hybrid that says, yes, this is worth continuing, and we're going to commit to doing it for another 2-3 years. And then we'll decide whether to make it permanent or some that doesn't lock us into spending a ton of money monitoring to the same level. So to me, I'm kind of open to that. 5 years is a long time in politics or local governments. And so to me to say tonight, oh yeah, 5 years, I don't know about that. But yeah, this is very cool. So I guess that's my feedback. And I look forward to hearing what the other boards have to say when they're wrestling with those questions.
Right. Well, thank you very much for your time.
We have final comment?
Just as you thought you were going to go, no, just a couple follow-up. Just to speak to the budget, I agree with Matt and Zan, what you were saying, and Jan, just about drilling into that, what that 5-year plan looks like, because it has been expensive, but I think a lot of that has been startup costs. So yeah, let's see what that looks like on the longer term. And to Jan's point, how we can get that, maybe potentially better and better. And the other one, just to echo Matt's comment about the leasehold area, the Calmer is perfect, but maybe it could be a little more utilized and still be just as calm. So if there's a way to tweak that a little bit, it's worth considering.
Sweet. Did you get what you need?
Thank you very much.
Cool.
Cheesecake in there?
That's what I heard.
Everything's good.
We have a lot of ash because ash is a really, really
I think a lot of people have a perception of the tree in their yard as more of a liability than an asset. And in all reality, you know, a large mature tree in your yard, as valuable as it is as a tree, can be just as valuable as lumber and can be even more valuable as a piece of furniture. So the opportunity to take something like this and make an heirloom product out of it is very real.
Turning two community challenges into positive opportunities. More information at treeop.org.
So good evening, Council. Yvette Bowden, I'm Director of Parks and Recreation. It's nice to see everybody again. We are very pleased to be visiting with you again since last September when you sent us away to think a little bit about both the emerald ash borer response and a long-term forestry management plan for the community. We've been doing lots of homework and reaching out to the community. So tonight we'll update both of those issues. I'm here this evening with Kathleen Alexander, our city forester, and Jeff Haley in Parks and Recreation Planning. We'll first go to Kathleen, who will update us on emerald ash borer and our response.
Well, good evening, and thank you for having us tonight. Before diving right into emerald ash borer, though, I wanted to take just a minute to talk about Boulder's urban tree canopy. You know, in the memo, we explain what tree canopy is, but basically, if you take a bird's eye view of Boulder and just look at the layer of leaves and twigs and branches that make up all the trees and shrubs, that's pretty much going to be the UTC, or the urban tree canopy. And it's expressed as a % of the total land area within city limits here in Boulder. We just recently completed our urban tree canopy assessment, which showed that our urban tree canopy is approximately 16%. That's an average, though, across the city. If you think about it, though, that ranges greatly from a low of about 3% up in Gun Barrel to a high of about 30% plus down on University Hill. And you can see how we compared to some of the other communities there. Although some of those other communities do have very different climates. Some are more conducive to growing trees, some are less. So it's just sort of used as, a baseline of sort of how we're doing overall. But one of the key points that came out of this analysis that I wanted to bring up tonight was the fact that only 25% of the urban tree canopy is actually under public jurisdiction or management. And that includes the city, Boulder Valley School District, CU, the federal properties here. But the remaining 75% is private property. So that means you can see that to be determined under goal for the city of Boulder. Through the strategic plan process, that is one of the outcomes for this, will be to sort of set a goal for our city. And I think those numbers are pretty important to point out that whatever goal we set, it has to be a collaborative effort between both public and private property owners here in town. Unfortunately, though, as I had mentioned a couple years ago when we were here, our canopy does face some pretty big threats. Invasive pests, we're here tonight to give you an update on emerald ash borer. Unfortunately, EAB is not the only one out there. We do have other invasive pests. Climate change, certainly. Trees can help mitigate the impacts of climate change, but trees are also very vulnerable to climate change. And that includes some of those severe weather events. If you think back to November of 2014, we had that severe temperature fluctuation that killed a lot of Siberian elms here across Boulder. That bottom photo is just a row of them that were killed in that. And then just those 2 big spring snowstorms that we had last year, too, another example. And then clearly development can also impact our tree canopy. But again, that loss is going to vary greatly among neighborhoods. Just taking emerald ash borer, for example, those neighborhoods that have a higher % of ash, like for example, the Whittier neighborhood would be much more impacted than say Mapleton Hill, where the % of green ash is much lower. Now, emerald ash borer has been really called the worst case scenario in terms of invasive pests. And why is that? Its populations expand exponentially. It kills trees very quickly. Detection is so hard. When we found it here, and we found it relatively early in that sort of progression, it was estimated that it had been here at least 3 to 4 years prior to when we had found it in 2013. And unfortunately, all of the ash will eventually die without the use of pesticides. And if you think of it in terms, again, going back to the urban tree canopy, ash are large maturing trees. They have very big tree canopies, and they have a lot of leaf area. So even though 12% of our public trees are ash, when you look at it on a number basis, and we're assuming that same % for private property, that equates to about 24% of our urban tree canopy overall. So emerald ash borer is becoming a lot more obvious in Boulder. I mean, that upper photo is Boulder Reservoir. The other 3 photos are taken down around Baseline. One of them is just south of Baseline on 55th. The other 2 are around Baseline and Broadway. Now, one of the things I had mentioned was that emerald ash borer does kill trees very quickly. This photo is taken of a row of ash trees at University Hill Elementary along 16th Street back in September of 2016. This is that same row of trees taken a photo in September of this year. So you can see just in a 1-year period of time, the progression of symptoms from emerald ash borer. And then that area after those trees was removed earlier this month. And unfortunately, what happens is once the trees die from emerald ash borer, they dry out very quickly, and then they start to fail. And what happens then is they're posing a threat to public safety, to both people and property. So as a city, we really need to be more proactive in removing trees before they reach that stage on the lower left. We really should be removing these trees, the upper right photo, when they're still green, when they're just starting to show symptoms.
Can we pause there for a second? So, I mean, that trees become dangerous within a year. Can I push back on that a little bit? I mean, there's lots of dead trees around, and it's not like their branches go falling off the first year, right? So does it really, anyhow, say more about that. I mean, are ash more different than other dead trees? Is it really within a year, or is it more like within 3 years?
They have done research in the Midwest that has shown that, yes, ash are different from other species. A lot of it has to do with just the wood itself. When you look at Siberian elms, we had a lot of Siberian elms die back after that 1991 Halloween deep freeze that we had. And we had dead standing Siberian elms 9-10 years after that event on private property that had yet to fail. But with ash, the research has shown that within a year after the trees have died, the moisture content is down below 20% in the wood. And so the trees are just so brittle. A lot of tree care companies, for example, once a tree is more than 50% symptomatic for emerald ash borer, they'll no longer send climbers up in the tree because it's no longer safe for the arborists as well. So.
Kind of follow up on that. So you showed us the picture down in the lower right is public trees. Is that correct?
Yes, these are right-of-way trees.
So how do we handle ash trees on private property?
We will
Oh,
be
you're getting to
talking-
that,
yes,
okay.
We will be talking about that, yes. So to date, we have removed just over 1,350 public ash trees. And unfortunately, emerald ash borer is now impacting our older, more historic neighborhoods where we have a lot more public ash that are much larger in diameter. We're also seeing a lot more ash decline and die along creek corridors, including Boulder Creek Path. We're seeing symptomatic trees all the way from really behind Boulder Justice Center all the way out through Folsom along the creek path. So what are we doing to mitigate for emerald ash borer? Clearly, tree planting has to be the top of our priority list. We have to get new trees in to replace those that we know that we've already lost or that we know we're going to be losing. If you want to try and put a positive spin on emerald ash borer, you could say that 20 or 30 years from now, our forest would be more resilient because we're trying to plant at least 35 different tree species a year. And diversity in tree species really is the key to resiliency when you're talking about urban forests. So,
And I have a question about that. How the tree species that you select, are you selecting them strategically based on climate change predictions?
We are, that's a very good question. A lot of the trees that we choose, I've been working here for about 20 years, and when I first started, we were choosing trees primarily in a cold hardiness zone 4 at that time, because that's what Boulder was listed as. I think we were like a 4B. Now we've actually moved more into the range of like a 5A because of our temperatures. They just don't get as cold. So there are, in some ways that, I don't want to say by any means that it's a good thing, but it opens up the palette of species that we may be able to plant here. So every year when I say that we're planting 35 different species, we have those species that historically have done well here, but we're also experimenting with some other tree species, sweet gums, tulip poplars, species like that, that typically you would find in a more sort of southerly range, but we're hoping that maybe long-term they would work here, so, yeah.
So should we, is this the place to talk about diversity? Or does that come up later?
It comes up later as well.
Okay, because I am curious about this a lot. I wonder at our choices, and I know there's a method to it, so I don't understand it. Like, we live in a ponderosa pine zone, we don't plant ponderosa pines in public ways. Why is that?
A lot of that has to do with matching the trees to the individual site conditions. And the site conditions that we have down here in the urban part of Boulder are not really where ponderosa pine is used to growing. You know, it's, for example, surrounded by concrete. Our soils down here are actually different than they are up in the foothills where ponderosa pine is native. Our soils down here, you know, if you think of, you know, a project, a lot of the native soil is sort of taken away and replaced or scraped away. And so the soils that remain are not as good as some of the native soils. And ponderosa pine is one of those species that just does not do as well in poor soils.
But
So-
as we go to the part about the long-term canopy diversification and health, we're happy to kind of also talk a little bit about availability of trees and the fact that 75% of the canopy actually exists, and much of this replacement opportunity will exist on private residential and commercial.
Okay. Well, when they were planting trees out in front of my house, I mean, we were offered 6 varieties. Anyhow, I'm sorry, I was like, I hope the heck there's more. Anyhow, again, I'm sure that there's a big plan, but when I think about the fact that 25% of our canopy is going to go because one species is getting nailed by an invasive pest, well, I hope anyhow, I just hope we're diversifying a lot, because we can just expect more and more of this, I think, as things slowly unravel in terms of invasive pests. Now, you guys are the expert. I know just enough to be, I mean, I've taken forestry and stuff, but that was as an undergrad. I'm sure things have changed. But I do wonder if we aren't, I mean, and plus, like places like Mapleton, right? There's a ton of maples being replanted there because it's Mapleton Ave, right? And it looks damn nice. And people like maples. But that doesn't mean that that's a good strategy, but I wonder that we're just going to have catalpals everywhere, which are lovely trees. But, you know, anyhow.
Okay.
I just throw that out there.
Okay.
That really leads to the next slide, actually.
Yeah, actually, well, this chart is also in your memo, but this is a chart looking at the number of trees planted and the number of trees removed, and this is just public. I suppose, ideally, you should plant more than a 1-to-1 ratio, just to try and keep on top and at least maintain, because you're really removing trees this size, you're planting little trees back. But we're doing a pretty good job of maintaining at least a 1-to-1 ratio up until we found emerald ash borer, and for a year or so after that. And then the trend sort of started downward. And a lot of that is just not only because of emerald ash borer, but also because of that 2014 freeze that we had. Since that time, we've had to remove about 500 dead Siberian elms. So again, that trend we do continue. We do expect it to continue downward with emerald ash borer. It is going to be hard to keep up with tree planting until we sort of see the end when emerald ash borer sort of plays out here in Boulder. Now, as Yvette had mentioned, you know, again, going back to that 25-75 ratio, there is a lot of opportunity to get more trees planted on private property. And so we've been trying to help private property owners with that. In 2016, and then again this year and next year, we were giving out the seedlings as part of the Water Festival to Boulder Valley School District 5th graders. This year, we also started a partnership with the National Arbor Day Foundation, where they have corporate sponsors that donate money that we then use to purchase little seedlings to give out to the public. And then next year, we're also going to start a tree sale, similar to what Longmont had done this year, where they actually, the city will sell trees, larger trees. These will be like 15-gallon trees, containerized trees. But they'll be at a greatly reduced cost to the public. Now, pesticide treatment. As I mentioned earlier, all ash, unfortunately, here in Boulder will die from emerald ash borer unless they're treated with pesticides. Our plan was to treat around 25%. We're treating about 22% of our ash on a 3-year rotation with the chemical emamectin benzoate, the triage. One of the questions we get asked most commonly is if the pesticide is effective. The one that we're using, you can see in that photo down at the bottom, the untreated versus the treated tree. We are seeing this play out across town, that in some parts of town, the only ash left remaining are those that have been treated.
Can I ask you a question about the all ash trees will die? Is there a certain point at which the epidemic will run its course and they're kind of gone because they have nothing else to eat? And if we've treated, and maybe this is 20 or 30 years from now, but if we keep treating these trees, is there some point at which we don't have to treat them anymore because the EAB has moved on?
Well, we have, EAB has been in the Midwest for about 20 years now. So we can sort of look at what the experience has been from some of the cities across the Midwest. And what they've found is, I mentioned earlier, EAB, the populations expand exponentially. So what they've found is, without the use of pesticides in a very short period of time, in some cases maybe 10 to 12 years, all of the ash trees would be beyond treatment at that point because of emerald ash borer. But after that point, after EAB sort of sweeps through a community and takes out all of those trees that are not being treated, its populations, yes, will decline because it has sort of eaten itself out of house and home, so to speak. But it will not go away. It will still be there. Back in the Midwest, they have native ash forests. So there's sort of that source there until those trees die for the emerald ash borer to come back in. Here we have a lot of naturalized ash, too, along our creeks and corridors.
But it's not native here?
It's not native. Ash is not native.
Why
No.
do we have 25% of our canopy of a non-native species?
Yes, most everything is non-native, right. So, but the hope is that long-term, for example, now, if we're treating trees every 2 years, every 3 years, that because the populations would decline naturally and because of the biocontrols, that was a perfect sort of segue into the biocontrols, that we'd be able to stretch out those pesticide applications. So maybe we could do them every 4 years, 5 years, or longer.
But you're stuck doing them essentially permanently.
Yes, yes.
You want to save those trees?
Yes, if you want to save those individual trees. Yeah, what we had mentioned here a couple years ago was that really when it comes to the pesticides, what our hope is long term is to sort of use this to stage removals out over a long period of time and get more trees planted in the meantime. And trees take time to grow, especially here in our climate. So over that period of time, that would allow us to then, sort of stage that tree canopy out too. So stage that loss of tree canopy, I suppose you could say, out over a longer period of time. Yeah. Now the biocontrols, we are still releasing the wasps. You can see there in the lower right, that photo, how tiny they are. They are non-stinging. The takeaway message here is that we are finding them overwintering, and when we peel branches, we are actually finding them parasitizing the EAB larva, which is very good news. Now, the city does have a duty to enforce for private trees that threaten public property. In our code, though, you can see it says remedy the condition within 15 days from the date of the notice or such shorter time as the manager finds appropriate. What we're finding, though, in this photo is actually a photo of a couple of large dead ash trees that we did enforce on this year because they were overhanging a sidewalk and street. What we're finding, though, is tree care companies here are so incredibly busy and overwhelmed that they can't even get out there in 15 days to give a quote for the work. And then if they're pushed on it, the prices are just astronomical. So, excuse me? Oh, thousands, yes. Especially to respond that quickly. Yes. So just like I was saying earlier that we have to be more proactive in removing our public trees, we need to give the private property owners a much longer period of time to get those private trees removed. So moving forward, rather than sending notices when the tree is at this point, we want to send more, I'm not sure what we'd call them, almost courtesy type notices to say, hey, you have a symptomatic ash tree on your property. You are going to save a lot of money if you remove this tree now, if you're not planning to treat it, rather than waiting until it's dead. Because once it's dead, then it not only would become an enforcement issue, but the removal costs will go up significantly at that point.
And the danger.
Yeah. If you think about a dead ash tree in a backyard, as I mentioned earlier, once ash trees pass like that 50% symptomatic point, you can't send climbers up in the tree anymore. And if it's a tree in the backyard, you can't access it with a bucket truck, which means it becomes a crane removal, which then, yes, the prices go up quite a bit at that point. So now, sustainability and the wood utilization. One of the lessons we've learned is that there is no one solution to the wood utilization issue. We will have a lot more wood debris moving forward because of emerald ash borer. But I think that's also opened up a lot of opportunities and created some really good partnerships. TREOP is just one of those. And just to put in a shameless plug, on December 8th, TREOP will be hosting an exhibition in the library to sell products. So we do invite you all to come out right before Christmas. Perfect timing. So. And then education outreach for emerald ash borer. We have tried multiple different avenues. I mean, websites, Channel 8 updates, open houses. We've been at farmers markets, the summer festivals. We've done extensive workshops and tours for industry professionals. And we've also received great support both from the Play Foundation and from several local businesses. McGuckins, for example, hosted our tree giveaway this year. We've also had tables at McGuckins several times. And then Resource as well, going back to the wood issue. Resource, actually, we've milled some of our logs, had them kiln dried, and then Resource has actually sold the lumber. So it's been a great partnership there. Now, when I was...
Our neighborhood,
Yes.
that'd be a good way to get the word out.
Now, when I was here in 2015, one of the things that we had talked about as part of our, I suppose you could say as part of our emerald ash borer strategy, we had found that several of the issues surrounding emerald ash borer, like pesticide use, the wood utilization piece, wasn't just specific to emerald ash borer. So rather than just doing an emerald ash borer management plan, we actually wanted to take sort of a bigger approach and do an urban forest strategic plan. So for that, I will turn it over to Jeff Haley.
Yeah, and as Kathleen mentioned earlier, our main goal this evening is just to bring you up to date on this EAB response and where we're at with the community. But as several of you have already mentioned, it does require planning to ensure the long-term forest. Trees, as you know, and as you can see by now, are critical infrastructure to the community. Just like roads and bridges and transportation network, the trees provide a value and a benefit to Boulder that we must take care of. In fact, some of the initial research we've done with our planning efforts basically shows that about $5.2 million annually is the benefit we receive from our urban forest here in Boulder. So we want to make sure we take care of that in the long term. We've kicked off the planning process over the past year with basically 4 steps, just looking at inventory and analysis of what do we have, determining goals and priorities in terms of what do we want the forest to be, how do we get there, what are the actions and the implementation strategies we have, and then how can we measure that annually to make sure we're meeting those goals. So the process has really kicked off well over the past several months. Uh-oh.
Did you plug in yours? Because the other one was dying.
There we go.
All right.
Like I said, there's basically 4 phases. We're at the action plan stage right now where we're starting to overlap into drafting that plan. And so that's why I wanted to come to you all this evening. We actually had the benefit last night working with our Parks and Rec Advisory Board, sharing similar information, getting a lot of great input from them as well. Basically, early next year, first quarter of 2018, we hope to get a final plan developed, and then we'll be sharing the outcomes of that with council. We've done a lot of outreach to the community. In fact, we've developed a whole initiative called Branching Out, and to really, so there's all kinds of quotes and things we can do. So we've worked with a lot of neighborhoods. You mentioned neighborhoods a moment ago, specifically with children and youth in the community, our next generation, basically. And then a lot of the professionals, our arborists, our peers in CU, and Also, probably most importantly, our advocacy groups, those who really care about the forest and can work together with us on the solutions. So there's just a few key themes we want to just provide. Your memo packet provides a lot more information. In fact, we have a whole attachment on the summary of community input. But I won't go through these in great detail, but basically one of the key themes is planning. We need to develop better drought response plans. A lot of the items Kathleen mentioned about emergency response, how do we plan for those type of events? Integrating our forestry components into other city processes. Also, how do we manage more effectively? Realigning our forestry stewardship and management to be more comprehensive throughout the community. Like you heard, there's a lot of trees on private property. How can we better facilitate working with our private property owners? In that same realm, we have two themes, both connect and engage. How do we engage our volunteers? How do we engage partners in terms of funding and leveraging private funds with our public funds? And probably most importantly, how do we connect with folks? We want to make sure people are aware of EAB, aware of the long-term strategies for our forest, and how do we communicate that effectively? So that basically concludes our presentation. We do have just a couple questions that we posed in the memo and this evening that you can respond to. We've broken into the two different topics related to EAB, the strategy. And what we're really curious of on the strategy is, do you feel Boulder understands the emerald ash borer situation? Are we doing a good job of reaching out and educating the community, or how can we do more and be better in that outreach? And then finally, on the strategic plan, any questions we can answer or comments you have about our process, some of the key themes. And then one of the things we've highlighted in the memo, we didn't talk much this evening, but we're working with our Parks and Rec Advisory Board to really consider this plan as we move forward. And any thoughts and ideas about that?
So I had a question about the emerald ash borer has been around now for a while. Are you still finding that there's a large portion of the community that is unaware?
Yes, despite the extensive outreach that we've done, and there's a myriad of reasons for this. Although we've tried a lot of different avenues, I think until it actually starts to evidence on someone's property, they don't necessarily know what kind of tree they have, and they may not really be aware that this is a problem. So this is why we want to take that more proactive stance in door hangers and being out with people earlier to say, this is what it looks like, and this is what you'll see. We can always get better at letting people know. That was one of the pieces of feedback we got from Preb last night, to never stop trying to tell this story. You don't want to scare people, but at the same time, you want to let them know why this is happening, where this is happening, and what they can do, both to be a part of the solution, but also that we can all be we need to shepherd this urban forestry system together. The last thing I would say to that is emerald ash borer is just one impact. There are different species with different impacts, and certainly the canopy, in order to sustain over time, is going to need the love of everybody. One of the big challenges that came up last night, and certainly that we're aware of, is a large portion of the property occupiers are renters. So they don't own the property where the tree, we're sending notices to the property owner, and the property owner is not here seeing what's happening. And so one of the things we're thinking about that came up in the feedback sessions with the community is we need toolkits so that people can talk to their landlords and to their neighbors in a more constructive way about handling this together.
Well, the rental association.
We are, rental associations.
Yeah, and I guess the other thing I would hope that we begin to emphasize is the safety issue. And that seems to be something that could really get people's attention, is if you don't take care of this, it could do personal harm and property harm. So I think that's an important thing to emphasize without stirring fear in people. But and the other piece of it is the whole pocketbook piece of it. The longer you wait, the more it's going to cost you. So if there's a good way to communicate that through an infographic on a door hanger or something, that would be, I think, really helpful.
Yeah, I think we're shooting our next Channel 8 segment within a week, so we'll make sure we mention those things as well.
Well, and I think it's been in the newsletter, right? But I mean, the deal is to make it clear what I can do. Both if I have an ash tree that looks like, well, if I have an ash tree, period, if I either treat it or you're going to have to get rid of it. So prepare yourself. But then also, if you want to be a part of the solution and grow more trees on your property, especially if there's a cost effectiveness component to engaging people, I say let's figure that one out. And I'm glad that we're looking to partner with some foundations and how to help make it easy for people to do the right thing. I guess I also was glad to see you saying in the slide before, you talked about the one right before it, communicate recommendations and tree requirements during drought periods. Yeah. I feel like like right now, right? It's pretty warm out, and anyhow, figuring out ways to help people be good stewards. Because this is part of the climate solution, right? Trees sequester carbon. We want to have a robust tree canopy. So we want people to kind of get it in their head that they're part of the solution here, and it involves taking care of trees. So I think that is all very positive. I'm pretty certain I live on the hill that most people are not paying attention, right? But that's because there's a high turnover there, and there's a lot of rental. But everybody else, the homeowners should be, and we should get the landlords and landladies to. We got their attention with smart regs. Let's get their attention on the other parts of being good citizens. Just my two other thoughts are, I do care a lot about the species diversification piece, I think, because we're going to keep getting these waves hitting us of invasive species. And I also think there's a whole aesthetic to that as well that I think, because trees are so important to what our city looks like, that thinking that through as well. I mean, I look at what's going on down at the Pearl Street Mall, and they've had to take out some trees. And guess what? It changes the nature of that in a big time. And what we replant down there, it matters. So I hope smart people are thinking all that through and making good choices that will serve us for the next 50 years. And then the last thing I would say, and how do I say this? I think this problem will take care of itself, but I have fought on behalf of certain trees that to keep them from being cut down because they were old and they were starting to be in decline on the city right away. And it seems to me that if there's a public safety issue, I get it. But I also think that from an ecological perspective, old growth trees have they have a lot of value. And I don't know, I complained to Jane once about a big old cottonwood that had just started to decline, so they just took it down. It wasn't near, anyhow, it was going to be a source of great joy and beauty for another, I don't know, several years. But anyhow, we decided as the city came and just took it down and bam, and it was like, wow. And now there's nothing, it's just barren. Anyhow, my point is prioritizing what trees we're taking down, and the ones we have to, absolutely. I mean, the ash seems like it's compelling, but I question sometimes some of the other big old trees that are taken down because they're gonna die. That to me seems kind of a strange way of looking at it. So anyhow, I just throw that out there as an experience I've had. We got Matt and Aaron.
I just wanted to piggyback on that. I mean, there are times to be really proactive and cutting down really healthy trees that are going to die before too long is maybe not the place to be really proactive. So I trust your expertise on making sure that we keep our community safe, but I just want to echo the sentiments that Zan get.
Yeah, no, I think you're doing a great job, but this is a tough one because not only do you have to explain it to people, but it's really expensive. And that's a lot of things we explain to people, they have to meet code, they have to do this, they have to do that, that's fine, but this is really expensive. The one thing you might do is slightly, well, maybe you're doing this, and we've treated 2 of our trees, we took one out, and this is pricey, is that as expensive it is to treat them, and it is expensive to treat them, I think, at least anecdotally, and from what I've seen in our neighborhood, you could treat a tree for at least 10, maybe 12, 14 years for the cost of taking it out. And I don't know if people know that, because it sounds awfully expensive to treat it, and it sounds awfully expensive to keep doing that every 2 or 3 years. But when you compare it to the cost of taking a tree out, especially if it isn't easily accessible, it's rather astounding what that costs you. So, if somebody can get 12 plus years, if they catch it early enough, and if they know to look for it, and if they know what an ash tree looks like, and that's all stuff you can help people with, you might be able to sell them on that. And I'm just not sure people get that. And understandably, they put it off because it's expensive. This is really expensive stuff. I don't know what we do with all the rental units, both in both ways. The landlords are usually not fond of investing a lot of money, although eventually they're going to have to deal with it. And then secondly, they're not there all the time. Some of them are never there. They're out of state. How do you get them to really understand what's going on? I mean, I would think, given that there's a pretty hefty percentage of rentals in Boulder that are owned by, several big companies, that you really want to work with them and get them off the dime and get them to really do it. Sure, there's lots of, individually owned rentals too, but there's a massive number of units in Boulder that are owned or at least managed by a relatively small number of companies. So it's kind of frankly, a combination of informing and a little bit of beating on them as to why it's worth their while in the end, and, why we will enforce at some point. We will enforce our rules, and, they've also got liability, even if it's a internal tree. If it hurts somebody, it's going to be their liability eventually. So that's about all I can think of. I mean, I don't know how you do it. In our neighborhood, which is not very much rental, people have been reasonably active in treating trees. But I could easily see where in a neighborhood that has more rentals, it's going to be a lot tougher to get that word around.
Well, and what about our mobile home parks?
Well, yeah, I mean,
to that end? Yeah.
That's kind of like a homeowners association. I mean, that's another big owner of a lot of trees or homeowners associations.
Who has to take down the trees will factor, anyhow, that's a thing to try to get ahead of, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you're talking to the big HOAs because they own big common areas and they got lots of trees. And the homeowners association has to pay for it because they do common, landscape. And you got to get in there too and tell them it's more expensive if you wait, plus you can save. I mean, even if you only save a third of the trees, that's a lot. That would be spectacular if we could save a third of the trees worth saving. Obviously not a third of every ash tree in Boulder, but a third of the trees worth saving would be pretty spectacular if we could do it. And I think it's cost effective. You just got to explain that to people. So it's a tough thing to do. How do you get the word out to everybody? I don't know. I think you're doing a great job, but we just gotta kind of try every possible avenue we've got. The paper has certainly run some articles on it. If we can get some more in there, that would be great too.
So just real quickly, the mobile home ordinance does mandate that the park owner take care of the trees, as I recall.
Right. Especially if they're going to be dangerous. Everything good. And the utilization part and the creativity going into that is really cool. And both on the Knight Foundation project, but also the resource project where they're actually milling it and selling it. That's cool. And the fact that we're really trying to prioritize not putting it in a landfill, ding, 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 that's good, because that creates methane. Like, that's the anti-solution. So kudos to the city for being creative. Anything else?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I, for one, keeping us updated through IPs about how it's going, or I think this is important. I think people are going to wake up and start caring a lot more about what they can do about it. So Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And with that, we are adjourning.
So do we really not have a meeting until the 14th?
Yes.
Wow.
Because next Tuesday's Halloween, and then there's this election thing.